Wait till you hear why I was a few minutes late. Let's do this. All right, folks, welcome to What Are the Odds with Barnes and Baris. Barnes is going to join us soon. So I'm getting ready to do the show. I glance over one more time at Florida. I'm looking at the numbers in Florida. And ding, dong, the doorbell goes off, right? I kid you not. I kid you not. It's Elon Musk's pack urging me to early vote. And they're like, oh my God. I'm like, oh, wow. It's they're taking selfies and shit. It's hilarious. They're like, tell Robert we said hello. This is the thing. All right, because we got to talk about the early vote today. And I always tell you to be careful because the early vote is like an industry. And it's an industry filled with snake oil salesmen. All right. But I have been trying to get this across now. The early vote is telling us more about Democrats than it really is telling us about Republicans. All right. Why? Parties, the research is very clear. Party voters listen to party leaders and they adopt the strategy that party leaders push and they vote in that method. All right. Now, how well they get their voters to do that is what makes or breaks a get out the vote effort. I have been trying to explain to people that while Harris has more money, you have these groups, you have Trump's group itself. You have third-party groups. One of them, of course, includes Elon Musk's. These people are doing their jobs, and they're doing it well. And you can see it in the data, in the database, which I just got asked and requested again for the Michigan vote, who has voted so far in Michigan and who hasn't. But if you look at North Carolina, if you look at Florida, if you look at Georgia, and if you look at Nevada, which we're going to talk about today, if you look at Arizona, by the way, you have Charlie Kirk's organization Turning Point, which is now, because it was about registering them first and then now it's about chasing, and that's what they're doing. And they will follow up with me to make sure I cast a ballot. That's what they want to know, whether or not. And of course we have other members in our household who are of course target voters as well. All right, so you can see it in the early vote numbers. So let's just go ahead and address the elephant in the room. So a couple of podcasters handled this question today. I saw a clip of myself about 50 seconds rolling all over the internet yesterday and people weighing in on it. So let me just repeat it again. And when Barnes gets here, I'm sure he's going to agree. And I'm sure he watched the clip from yesterday. And because I did what was supposed to be an hour, it turned into like an hour, 10 minutes, maybe 20 minutes, because we were postponing the show until today. If this continues, if these numbers continue, if they hold, and as of right now, it's October 22nd. I do expect Democrats to have a surge in some of these states, but I'm going to tell you what's problematic for them. All right, just bear with me in a second. But if this continues where we are at right now in this current trajectory, this election will absolutely be called on election day. That is where we are at. And Barnes just popped in. So let me say this again. If this trajectory continues, this election will be called on election night. And also, and by the way, cut the bullshit. Democrats, when they're being honest, will tell you the same. And let me just bring in Robert. Robert, what's up, my friend? I know you heard me say that. You probably saw the clip of me saying it yesterday, and now it's like floating around. There's other people weighing in on this. What is your take? I mean, I hate reading the early vote tea leaves, but just as I was coming on, Elon Musk's people knocked on my door. this is like the third, by the way, I've gotten multiple knocks and calls and everything. Democrats do not have this get out the vote edge as of right now that they usually have in early voting. And of course, Republicans will perform even more so on election day. Democrats will not miraculously turn into election day voters. So do you agree with that assessment basically that I'm making here, that if something doesn't dramatically, and it has to change dramatically, folks. I'm not talking about a few more mail-in ballots in Clark County. I'm talking about dramatically, because Democrats really need two things. If it does not change and they don't get those two things, this election will be called on election day. And when the polls close, people will be looking at the exit polls. They'll see what's going on. They'll know and have estimated the amount of absentee ballots that are still outstanding, and states will be called, and you will hear that Donald Trump is the 47th president. That is going to happen if this does not change. Would you agree?
Yeah, and I think, on today's show, we'll break down what the early vote tea leaves mean, how to interpret them, how not to interpret them,
what not to listen to.
Yeah, exactly. What you can extrapolate, what you can't, where there's useful information and where there isn't. Secondly, we'll break down. This is a book about a famous political fundraising money launderer, King of Cons, but the book was chosen because it's in honor of the fraudster we're going to expose today, which is the one and only Nate Silver.
The Slimer himself.
Never gold. The Nate Silver's out there telling everybody that his prediction models have been far more successful than the betting markets. It won't surprise anybody to find out he's a complete fraudster. That's totally false. Some of us have actually been active in those betting markets since Nate Silver was in his bedroom singing songs to Barbra Streisand. So we'll get into what the real nature of the animal is in that regard. And I have updated predictions for the popular vote, the electoral vote, and one of the best metrics you can use to see how good somebody really is at predicting elections. Are they willing to give you margin of victory spreads like they were the sports book or the bookie on every single state? I'll give you my predicted, if I was the odds maker, where would I put the odds, the margin of victory odds for the White House in every single state? And I'll give you what those are. So it should be a fun episode. Oh, one little tidbit. To your point, I was just looking this up before the show, that as we've been emphasizing throughout the year, always in looking at data, look at like to like data.
To like data. Oh my God, this is so frustrating to me. Sorry.
I know. So what you want to do is, if it's a pollster and you want to know, are they showing something different than what happened in the last election? Don't look at what other pollsters have done. Don't look at what exit polls did. Don't look at what post-election validated polls did. Look at what that or a similar pollster using a similar mode and method and similar track record has done in the past election.
This is clearly a memo, Robert. Like, the memo went out. To me, it's like really obvious. And Harry, what do you think? You think he's allowing himself to be used like this because he walked right? He gave them the material they needed. I played this clip yesterday. Like, what Robert's talking about, folks, if you didn't hear the show yesterday, is very simple. They're comparing polling data now to how Trump actually performed in most cases. And that's total bullshit, because the polling did not project how he performed.
How he performed according to exit polls, which has its own set of problems.
Right. And the bottom line is, if you would compare, like, all right, he loves busting out the New York Times poll. Okay, well, Harry, if you looked at how he was supposed to perform against Joe Biden among the white working class, you would see that they grossly understated not only the working class, by the way, even those with a college degree. The New York Times only had Donald Trump winning the white vote between 6 and 9 points. That's it. Of course, he won them by more than double that low end margin. So if you're going to make these comparisons, and obviously because all of Harris's media surrogates, all of her campaign surrogates, they're all pushing the same thing. It's worded almost exactly the same, or they go on TV and they say the statements they make are exactly how they're written on Twitter. So a memo went out here. And by the way, folks, that's a really good way for you to tell whether or not somebody in media is credible or whether they're just a bullshit mouthpiece for a campaign. Because when they start regurgitating the things that you hear the campaign say, then you know that they're just simply not credible. Like, by the way, like somebody like a Nate Silver, right? Like, this is a guy who got his living, who made his bones, not by making some model. He was blogging about the polling data that David Plouffe was giving to him and pretending it was a model. He took a risk and took David at his word. Okay, this is more accurate than the public polls. I'll believe you. And it'll be a bigger landslide for Obama. But it doesn't matter anyway, because my freaking 5-year-old son could have predicted that Barack Obama was going to win that election. Get out of here. Give me a break. Let me just say this too real quick, Robert, because I know that, let's say next week, you and I come back on Monday and we start doing the show again to talk about another winner, John Ralston, who I would disagree. Everyone's like, oh, he's a straight shooter. No, he's not. He's a Democrat, and that's the end of the story, all right? When he's raising the alarm, it only tells you how bad it really is. If it was still bad, if it was just normal bad, he would spin it in a way to still give Democrats hope and keep their enthusiasm up. What he's doing right now is pulling the fire alarm because he wants them to go vote. And he knows that it's so bad he can't spin it. He cannot put the BS spin on it. All right. But in any event, somebody like him, if we come back in a week or so and Democrats are starting to inch out, what I want people to take away from this when we talk about early voting today is that it's not just about, oh, their firewall, their Clark County firewall of 20,000. You and I did an episode where we explained this already, and we have to remind people. They don't have the voter registration pool, the eligible voter registration pool, to build firewalls as big as they have in the past. And even if they did, the math has basically still changed because they're out of election day votes. If they build that firewall at 20K in Clark County, they have nothing left. Nothing. Robert and I have gone over this. This is why ignoring voter registration trends like John Ralston's been doing or trying to explain it away, like Nate Silver's been doing and trying to explain it away and give people copium. This is why it matters, because your ass turns into Florida 5 years from now, because your ass is like Florida 2016 right now, because your ass will turn into North Carolina. It's like we are seeing these things that are happening in these other states. Even in Arizona, one of only 2 states where trends actually favored Democrats in 2020, that arrested after 2020. It's been going in reverse for them since the election's over and Joe Biden took the oath of office. It's been moving in the wrong direction. And you cannot then say, all right, we're outperforming metrics, but only if we build this firewall in Pennsylvania. Your firewall in Pennsylvania was 500,000 when you had another 300,000 edge that you no longer have. This is what people aren't understanding. We did, Robert, I feel like this is 2016 all over again. I really do. Arguing that she does not have the pool of votes that Obama had on election day to edge out Romney by 70,000. She didn't have it because they lost so many. And then, by the way, also another thing is that Republicans would have to not vote at similar rates combined between mail and election day. They would need to have they would need to have that voter registration edge. If they can't get it and build those firewalls, they need both, really. They need both. Republicans not to vote at the same rates. They need both. So even if next week we come back and the firewall's 15,000 or 19,000 or 22,000, it doesn't matter. And then again, Robert, I mean, the 2-to-1 vote changing advantage that Trump has over Biden is so monumentally problematic. You lost by 40,000 votes across a handful of states. Yeah, or in the case of Democrats, you won by 40,000 votes in a handful of states. You cannot afford people telling pollsters and everybody that they voted for Biden, now they're voting for Trump, more than 2-to-1 over they voted for Trump and now they're voting for Harris. Like, there's no Trump voter voting for Harris. There's lots of Biden voters voting for Trump. And this is all like, I don't know. I mean, at this point, Robert, I just don't see it. I'm looking at the polling. I'd love to share some with you. Like, I mean, Florida, I mean, he's ahead with Hispanics. That's not even a competitive race. He's going to win Miami-Dade, that state. And I don't mean to like depress anybody in Florida so they don't vote and think it's in the bag. I mean, I'm just telling you, all of these years of polling Florida, we're coming up on a decade of me now being a public pollster in Florida. I've never missed it once. This is not a swing state. This is done. And you can't do that well, brother, in the Sun Belt and not expect it to carry over to Georgia and not expect it to carry over to North Carolina. Like, you can't. I mean, it just if it happened, I'm gonna call bullshit. I don't know what to say. Like, this is not really that close of a race, I guess is what I'm trying to say. As of today, it's not that close, my friend. It's not.
Yeah, I think that
Sorry.
to the point about the comparison of polls,
Yeah, I said a
that
lot there. Sorry.
you're going to continue to see the people come out and say, well, and compare the polls to their post-election polls, to exit polls.
Yep.
Don't fall for that. What you want to do is look at like-to-like polls from like-to-like time frames. Similar analysis for early voting. And when you look at that, what Cook Political Report put out a story this week that then Harry Anton reported at CNN and a bunch of other people did that
Yep.
said Trump is struggling with working class white voters, that he's dropping and that Harris is making inroads in that voter group. And what they're doing is they're looking at the polls and comparing them to exit polls, comparing them to post-election polls, and instead of looking at like-to-like polls. So I'll give an example. If you look at the crosstabs, what Harry should have done, what Cook Political Report should have done, what these others should have done, is looked at the crosstab data. So, and a lot of them have access to more crosstab data than we do. Look at that compared to the same crosstab from the same pollster in the last election cycle, and then see if there's a consistent trend. If they would have done that, as to Richard's point yesterday and today, then take Pew. Pew does publish all their underlying crosstabs.
Right.
In 2020, Pew, and 2024, it's true, they only have Trump winning the working class, non-college white vote by 29 points. So it's like, oh, that's a drop-off from the 33 that they found post-election. But look at what they found pre-election at the same time in October of 2020. They had Trump only winning working class whites by 26 points. So Pew's own data has Trump doing better with working class white voters than they found in 2020, than they found in 2016. So so that's just a apples to apples comparison and not get caught up in the misleading data. Second subcomponent is if you want to look at what really happened in 2020 in terms of forecasting 2024, don't look at exit polls. Exit polls as a whole are unreliable and untrustworthy. And I'll give you an example. One of the great myths that came out of 2020 that people like Ann Coulter and others pushed was that Trump lost serious ground with working class whites as a class, as opposed to certain unique subgroups in the electorate. Well, go look up the counties where working class, you should find that in precincts. You should find that in counties that have a strong working class white representation. And if you do that, you're not going to find any data to support that in actual election results. You're not going to find it in working class precincts, which are dominated by working class whites. You're not going to find it definitely in rural areas, but you're not even going to find a good number of exurban and suburban areas. And that's good in terms of transitioning into the early vote topic. I went back once again and relooked at 2020. 2020 was a story of three things. First, the pandemic changed the nature of the national election topic and discussion, from Trump's success on economy and war to the perceived chaos that was brought about by COVID and lockdown politics, and temporarily took away his trump card of the economy and created doubts about how, like we said, would happen. And you can go back and look, and Richard and I talking about it in April of 2020, that this was a massive miscue by Trump. And the only question was, could he catch up or not? And then, and so that was a big factor one. That factor is not present now. Factor two was mass mail-in voting. And the point Richard and I were making at the time was, and I made it on multiple betting podcasts, Vegas and, out here in Vegas, Kelly and Murray podcast, other places. I said the big X factor was, could mail-in voting substitute for natural enthusiasm in terms of assessing turnout probabilities? So historically, 2004, that the electorate was split. Bush people voted, Kerry people didn't, in terms of the low propensity voter. 2012, electorate was split again. Obama, low propensity voter, Obama dominated, massively won those low propensity voters over Kerry. In 2016, Trump's vote, low propensity vote, outvoted Hillary's low propensity vote, tipping it to him ultimately in the election. So in 2020, everything said in a normal election, Trump would win the low propensity voter again. However, the question was mass mail-in voting, where everybody's receiving a ballot. where they're part of this culture where everybody's going to vote by mail as some sort of personal expression and some cultural phenomena, could that reverse that? And then if you remove the safeguards, you remove the guardrails, could that open the door to election fornication in the mail-in balloting arena? And that if it could, the election was going to be, we were the only people predicting, one of the only people predicting, the election would be tight. Everybody else was saying Biden was going to win by more than Obama won in 2008. For those that have forgotten, including the one and only Nate Silver. His predicted margin of victory was 8.5 points for Joe Biden. In fact, he overstated the Democratic margin in every single state, which, by the way, he's done now in consecutive presidential elections. So if all you did was bet with the betting markets and bet against Nate Silver on every single state's margin of victory, you would be something like 95-5 against Nate Silver. He would have 5 wins and 95 losses. That's how bad he's been. But if you go back and dig into that data, so you had the mail-in voting phenomenon, which in a bunch of states moved it 2 to 3 points in Biden's direction, and almost consistently across counties. Now, in industrialized areas, in working class rural areas, Trump surged, and he picked up votes from 2016, despite the mail-in voting phenomenon helping Democratic turnout get over the lack of natural enthusiasm for Biden. So you dig into 2020, and what you find is it's growth suburbs with young people was the only people that were really swinging in the election towards Biden. Trump mostly gained because he got massive swings by Puerto Ricans, Cubans, and Mexican Americans. Though it wasn't uniform.
Minor gains in isolated areas like Scranton,
like
where
rural
she's not
working class
going to do well. Right.
But historically populist areas, if you know them ancestrally. But independent of that, places like coal country, Appalachia, old school industrialized areas that had been badly hurt, places like Youngstown in eastern Ohio, parts of central Pennsylvania, those kind of places like the northern woods of Wisconsin, he added votes. Well, as we predicted, you go and track the Norwegian vote anywhere. You can look at North Dakota, you can look at Minnesota, where they're overrepresented. That trended towards Trump from 2016 to towards 2020. 2 groups trended against Trump in 2020. The first group are Yankees. So that's why the Northeast swung the way it did. And when I get into my state predictions down the road, I think the 2016 map is a better baseline than the 2020 map.
Me too. 2020 was so whack, Robert. It was just
completely
whack for many reasons.
If you isolate Yankees, the rest of New England didn't swing that. Like if you get into French Catholic country in northern New Hampshire and parts of northern Maine, there isn't a big swing. It's when you get to those Yankee influenced areas, and remember your data picked this up. I mean, he was bleeding bad amongst English ancestry throughout the Northeast. It was going to hurt him in places like Philly too. The Philly suburbs. But the other area and it wasn't all suburbs. But what was interesting is it didn't matter where the growth suburb was located. It didn't matter whether it was Atlanta, Georgia, or Dallas, Texas. It didn't matter whether it was the certain parts of outside Philadelphia, or whether it was certain areas like parts of Omaha, Nebraska, or places like certain parts, suburban ring counties in Chicago, or some parts of Waukesha, Wisconsin, or certain parts of the Twin Cities, or you could just go anywhere. I mean, you could go to Boise, Idaho. And if you went to the suburban growth areas, especially these were pandemic-oriented suburban growth areas, you saw double-digit movement away from Trump in these areas. But what was interesting was it was very much a youthful growth mindset and a cultural phenomenon that I had doubts could be repeated and replicated 4 years later. And we're not seeing any evidence of that group having the same uniform concern. I mean, this is why Phoenix swung as much as it did. This is why Georgia swung as much as it did. You go to the Atlanta suburbs, the growth areas, it was 14, 15, 16-point movement from 2016 to 2020. Certain parts of Phoenix and why didn't Trump do better when now it's a Republican lean state and he picked up made inroads amongst Mexican American voters in Arizona and Mormon voters in Arizona? It was because the growth suburb areas around Phoenix overwhelmingly. Now, and that's also why Nevada didn't trend. Nevada stayed almost identical.
It actually lurched to the right because as the country moved 2.5 points to the left, Nevada barely budged.
But
so that tells you it's actually shifting to the right. This is what
relatively
people don't get, you know?
exactly, and that's another piece of evidence that it's not a urban phenomenon, not a suburban phenomenon.
Right.
It was look at places that had growth, especially growth during the pandemic, and were sort of youthful, tech-oriented kind of places. There was a cultural phenomenon of being anti-Trump and getting out to vote. Now, we would add to that, these places are also filled with apartment complexes of new people to register to vote that made a huge. These places were disproportionately places where you could steal ballots, to put it frankly. So so that's where people forget. Like, there was no mass inroads amongst working class whites. There was only one subgroup that Biden improved with amongst working class whites. They were independent. They identified as independent. They were men, disproportionately, not women, and they were Catholic. They were non-Hispanic, white non-Hispanic Catholics in the Midwest. Now, he had specific regional appeal in the Scranton area. Biden outperformed Hillary in the entire Scranton area by more than he did throughout the rest of the state.
Yeah, absolutely.
Large parts of central Pennsylvania didn't even budge between 2016 and 2020. Allegheny County didn't budge much between 2016 and 2020. In Pittsburgh, Erie only moved a little bit. Large parts of the Pittsburgh suburbs didn't move that much. It was the Philly suburbs, which were sort of a similar growth phenomenon kind of area. It wasn't just a cultural phenomenon. It was this broader trend that you find in Atlanta and Dallas and Kansas City and Omaha and all these other. I mean, you find it in Montgomery, Alabama. You find it in parts of Shelby County.
We went over this in parts of Kentucky, and meanwhile,
the Cincinnati suburbs. It was the only part of Ohio that moved because it both in the Ohio side and on the Kentucky border side.
That's right. If they give them a little heads up, when votes start to get counted early on election day, you're going to see places like Kentucky and Indiana get counted very early in the day. Immediately, people like Robert and I are going to go to like Vigo County, all right, Pike County in Indiana. Vigo is one of my favorites. It didn't budge at all. These are counties that have told us not only who was going to win, but even by like how much, depending on how they were performing in those counties. They barely moved. They didn't move really at all. I mean, Vigo was identical. Almost Pike was like just a hair off. I mean, but that's not enough to really, when I say a hair, I'm talking about marginal changes, folks, not multiple points, tens of percentage points. They didn't budge. It's like Trump won Vigo by 16. He won it in 16. He won it by 16 again. This just didn't move. I popped this up on the screen when you were talking. I just wanted somebody had asked me, just know that the weights will actually help Kamala in this poll. All right. But this is Florida, Robert, for the love of God. Look at that. This is the raw data in Florida. Trump 52.6, Kamala Harris 38.8. How long have we been going over polling data together? How long have we been going over the state of Florida together? Have you ever seen this before? I've never seen this in my life.
And actually, Florida's a good comparison because one of the ways
Trump plus 11 when weighted, by the way. But go ahead.
Yeah, one of the ways in which people misassessed Florida, I saw it actually being done again today on social media.
Yeah.
On the right was Florida trended Republican, and usually Florida and Michigan trend together. Here was the difference. The Michigan parts of Florida actually trended towards Biden. I mean, Jacksonville went from Trump to Biden between 2016 and 2020. Duval County. Which, by the way, Duval County and Georgia tend to trend together. Which,
by the way, it looks like he's going to take Duval this time again. He's up Duval by like 5 points.
And that'll be a good point to get in the early vote data. Duval was another one of those growth kind of suburbs, sort of youngish. It became a cultural phenomenon during the pandemic to get out and do mail vote and vote against Trump. And these were the only places that Biden made real inroads. Otherwise, it was working class, non-Hispanic, older, independent males that are Catholics who identified with Biden. And as we predicted, looking at like-to-like data, again, the same polling data from the same time frame by the same pollster using similar modes and methods and methodologies, it makes it hard to do IBD and TIPP and the rest because they've decided to change their mode methodology. So
it does.
See how accurate it ends up being, but you're in a little bit of uncharted territory. But amongst those working class, older, independent Catholic voters, men voters that Biden uniquely won. I mean, this is the irony of the entire Biden-Harris shift. That they focused on what voter groups they thought they could add with Harris, which, younger voters, millennials, minorities, Zoomers, women, etc. They ignored which voter groups they might lose with Harris. And that one group that Biden improved with,
Yeah, such a
independent,
good point.
men, white, non-Hispanic Catholics, she is getting crushed with.
Yeah,
She's going to underperform Hillary
she is.
with those voter groups.
Yeah, she is.
And
At this rate, she's definitely going to underperform Hillary, Robert. There's no
I'm
people have to start saying this shit out loud. She's going down right now worse than Hillary Clinton went down. That is the truth. Hand to God, the truth,
well,
Barnes. I don't know.
I have to counter that because Willie Brown said differently.
Oh shit.
So, but yes, you're precisely correct. The
sorry, I can't stop. Give me a second to compose myself.
So, but she is so use Hillary as a baseline. And Hillary, like you pointed out, Hillary had problems. Now, I'm sure we'll get some feminist. This will be part of the post-election wrap. That the feminist analysis will be why can't a woman get elected president in America? You can see it coming now. It's going to be part of the narrative that misogyny elected Trump. So get ready for it. But it is the reality is she got just a little bit of improvement amongst women, and mostly no real improvement of intensity amongst low propensity younger voters, minorities, millennials, and Zoomers that they were targeting. But she has lost vote group stage that Biden had regained amongst independents, amongst men, amongst non-Hispanic, white non-Hispanic Catholics. And so when you're looking at this demographic map, where are there a lot of those kind of voters disproportionately? Well, places like Pennsylvania, places like Michigan, places like Wisconsin. A lot of them, you pointed out, a lot of them, if you overlap, are going to have German ancestry, Irish ancestry, Italian ancestry. So these are groups. She's going to underperform Hillary with all these groups. She had no history of ever winning over these groups. Her campaign ads in Nevada are entirely, their new campaign strategy is pretend Trump is Biden and pretend Trump is a Romney Republican. So he's just going to give tax cuts to the rich, and he's going to cut Social Security. That's what he wants to give the middle finger to the middle class. It's this fiction fantasy land that these political consultants live in.
Is that the closing message though anymore? Like, I don't even know what it is. I think they pivoted.
I saw 6 ads yesterday in Nevada. I was back and forth to the airport, a bunch of other things.
Right.
And everyone was on the radio. It was on top. It was on this mic. So because I have multiple phones here. I was advised to get those years ago by somebody in the alternative product distribution business. And, and because of it, I get like I show up as somehow a Nevada voter or something else on one of my phones. And so I get like the text, they get out the vote stuff, the advertising, the solicitation, recruitment.
Yeah, we're getting bombarded by Apple now, by the way. I've gotten
3 or 4. Pointed out, the big tech is doing it again.
They're trying to crank up early voting for her. They should be charged by the Justice Department Civil Rights Division.
That's something that has to be looked into.
This has to be done, Robert. You're the lawyer. You tell me.
In fact, I was talking with someone yesterday about exactly how we need to pursue certain cases in the next Trump administration.
Good, because this is illegal.
To the early voting data. So, looking at like-to-like data, she's underachieving with pretty much every group. There's no group really she's performing better than Biden was in 2020 in those same polls, or that Hillary was in 2016. She's underperforming both of them. And it's almost across the board demographically, but it's particularly bad with groups that either Biden made inroads with or that Trump was weak with in 2016. She's underperforming in both. And now we go to the early voting data. And it's very difficult to predict winners out of early voting data. And I understand Democratic skepticism in some circles about early voting data predictability in the way Republicans are using it and conservatives are using it, Trump supporters are using it. Because we have the weird anomaly of this mass mail-in voting in 2020. And we don't know what part of that is going to be part of the future, what part of that is predictable, how much is that going to throw rent? And I don't doubt any of that. However, here's where it has been predictive. There's multiple states that have had forms of early voting from cycles all the way back to 2008. In those states, racial turnout data on like-to-like time frame has been predictive. Of what was going to happen on election day in terms of those demographic groups. And so one of the trends that I track And I track it in a state that a lot of people pay no attention to because it's often more predictive than the big states everybody pays attention to, and that's Louisiana. And if you
Oh,
watch
sure. Yeah.
Louisiana,
Yeah. 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 Go ahead.
credit to John
I got something to add
Cotillion.
to that.
I always get his last name mispronounced, but you can win with CMs or whatever it is on Twitter. But he's done a good job tracking early voting data and comparing like to like data in the early voting structure. And as he's pointed out, if you see lack of enthusiasm by black voters in Louisiana, he goes, you're going to see it in Georgia. You're going to see it in North Carolina. You're going to see it in Virginia. You're going to see it throughout the South. Now, it doesn't always translate to the urban North because that's its own animal politically, but it does translate throughout the South. And so what's happening there? And the second category that is very predictive with early voting has always been Nevada. Because almost everybody here votes early.
One of the strongest states too for Democrats. So I mean, if you take
absolutely, they
if
usually
they're
establish
gonna
a massive
vote,
firewall
gonna be
that is
there.
impregnable on election day.
Yeah.
And it's all built on Democrats in Clark County. Now, parts of that are the vestige of the Harry Reid machine that is still partially strong, but nowhere near as strong as it was when he was in office here. But the culinary union is a critical component of that.
That's right.
And that's where you want to always track working class unions.
What did they just say, Robert? What did they just say last week? They just said last week, Trump's winning the state. Listen, I will never discount them again. I will not forget Sharon Angle being ahead in the polling, folks, by like 5 points. And they dead ass with a straight face told all of us, you're all going to be wrong. Harry is going to take the state and it's not going to be particularly close. She was a bad candidate and made some fumbles, but it didn't matter. The polling still was telling us she was going to win. Harry won. In 2016, they were barking on Hillary's doorstep, going, you aren't doing well enough. If you don't kick it in a high gear, you're going to lose the state. She did at the end, barely, but she held on by a nose, right? And in 2020, when some states, CNN, by the way, it was like all over the place with polling, but popped out a Trump +6, and they were like, blew it off. No way. Biden's going to win this thing. Culinary likes Biden. They just said, Trump is going to win this state. And they call it state with a caveat. As of today, Trump's going to win. And it's not just what they know, folks. Like John Ralston's over there counting Democratic votes. I'm telling you from polling the state of Nevada myself, we are not looking at a partisan split the way we normally see it. We know that there are registered Democrats calling themselves independents and telling us they're going to vote for Trump, particularly non-white ones in Vegas. And they are, what are we just supposed to, we're just supposed to think they're full of shit, Robert? They're just full of shit? Come on.
The key to the organized Democratic Party machine here is all entirely service unions.
Yeah.
And that's where if there's any dissent within those unions in terms of their membership, then that completely negates the organizational efforts. Because what happens is a bunch of the people that are part of that organizational effort don't really work that hard for the candidate they're supposed to be working that hard for if they're not enthused by that candidate. And so and that's where, listening to tea leaves on, from the culinary union, other unions, other social media reporting that's out here. So, but Nevada has been highly predictive. So that, now it's always possible you get a change in timing. In other words, suddenly Republicans decide to vote early on in early voting rather than later. Democrats wait till later rather than earlier. So that's where you have to watch the whole process. Yeah. But historically, if Democrats did not have in their pocket a big, what's called a firewall, a big edge going into election day, then they would lose the election. Republicans would win the election. At this point in Nevada, and this has given validation to what we've seen in the whole rest of the country, Democrats are doing worse here than they've ever done in the early voting process. Here's Kamala Harris, supposed to have the best voter organization anywhere. Supposed to be, I don't know how many times I've heard from these Democratic analysts, Trump can't compete. I heard the same thing in 2016, by the way. Trump can't compete because he's got no ground game. That there is no ground game. The Democrats are going to dominate. And as someone who's been involved in politics going on more than a quarter century, when I was doing campaigns back when I was a kid, I was deeply skeptical of most ground games. Most ground games are getting people who always vote to the polls anyway.
Yeah.
A good ground game, and this is the other thing you should look for in the early voting data. So we got racial data out of Louisiana. It's also matching what's happening in Georgia, North Carolina, and Virginia. that rural black voters are not interested in this election. Low propensity, rural black voters are not interested in this election. Same in urban areas in those same states. And
Yeah.
by the way, this is what Richard and I talked several weeks ago. This was already in the voter registration data. Some of the worst declines in Democratic voter registration edges was coming in the southern black belt. It was coming in Tar Heel country.
How could they not expect this to hurt their bottom line when it came to election time and the early vote operations and just period to get out the vote operations when you knock? And by the way, let me read this because this is exactly the problem, Robert. This is like one of the core of the problems that Democrats have. All right. So this is commissioned by Fabrizio, who does polling for Trump as well, but Impact Research is Democratic. They do polling for Democrats, including presidential and senatorial candidates. And then this is for AARP. It's basically the same joint pollster operation conducted by a Republican, Democrat for the Wall Street Journal. A round of polls that they did, 2 weeks ago, I had Trump up by like 6 in Nevada, and everybody was like, it's a little too much. But now here they are, neck and neck. Trump's up by 2. With the full ballot, Trump's up by 1. But listen to this, all right? Where is it? Among voters 50 and older, Trump leads over Harris 51-44. But among older Hispanic and Latino voters, Trump leads by 15. However, Trump is ahead by 18 points among men overall and 17 points among men 50 and older. Women favor Harris. Looking at the breakdown, older Hispanics and Latino voters go for Harris. Younger, so anything below the age of 50 that's non-white is a problem for Harris. All right, so this is like happened never. Like we'd have to go back to when George Bush, before he collapsed the economy, along with Republicans who did nothing but hold their dicks while Democrats gave away everything. Pardon my French, ladies, that's why I blame Bush for it, because he did nothing. And him and Hank Paulson knew that it was coming and they did nothing. So while it was a Democratic policy that caused the collapse, I blame George Bush because he knew about it and he was too afraid of Barney Frank and Chris Dodd to do anything. And it's pathetic, right? Man can wage war in a third world country and kill and maim 1 million people who had nothing to do with the offense, yet he can't stop Chris and Barney Frank. You got to be kidding me. But in any event, I ramble on. You would have to go back to before the Great Recession and the collapse of the housing market to see a Republican doing this well with Hispanic voters under the age of 50, right? It hasn't happened. After they were disproportionately harmed by that economic calamity, they went heavily Democratic. And it has been a problem for Republicans getting them back ever since. Trump has been, obviously, we've been talking about it forever. All right, if you still think he's not doing better with the non-white vote, you're living in a fantasy land. The only question is how much, all right? The bottom line is here, this is a disaster. I can tell you, because I know for certain that Tony told Trump in 2020 that he's got to stop listening to these yes men. He was going to lose Nevada. He needed to either, they just didn't have to get out the vote to overtake it, and that he was going to lose Nevada. So I'm trying to say this for one reason. It is a lot for Tony to put out a poll to show Trump ahead in Nevada. All right. He is like me, where it's like, I know the state's trending to the right, but I'm skeptical. Folks, this turnout problem is real. The Los Angeles Times just announced that they are not endorsing for president. That's the first time since the 1960s, I think. I have to go back and look. There's massive problems. They're not going out on a limb for this woman. All right? They're not doing it. The culinary unions aren't doing it. It's like, I don't know what else to say. They're not going to risk themselves. They know that she and Biden did too, but that she has problems with these voters. Robert, I think we're at a point where some of these groups and these people and institutions, they don't want to risk their own credibility going to bat for her. And that's what it looks like to me. Okay? Media turns on Democrats when they think they're losing. Look at that NBC story today. She's going to lose Michigan. It's going to vote to the right of Pennsylvania. What? If it hasn't, folks, if Michigan votes to the right of Pennsylvania, I don't know what I'll do live on television, but I'll do something drastic. If it does, and it may, because even my polling suggested it's possible, but it's I already bet somebody, Robert, that I got to drink till I don't know what I said. I don't know what I said. A couple of shots if you're right about the popular vote. But I thought at that time, in fairness to me, it was a Trump +4. At this point, I think it's likely he wins by 2. Like, I think it's, the popular vote. I think it's a
Yep.
likely scenario. He can't do this well in these states and lose the popular vote the way that Republicans have lost it in recent years. He just can't.
To give people some comparison, that is what the early vote data is trending. That
Yeah,
and it's not so much
it
like someone
is.
was asking about modeled vote. I don't look at that very much because a lot of that's based on dubious modelers.
Yeah, the Tony
And
Boner models. Come on, dude.
yes,
It's bullshit.
and it's I only
Target
look at
smart.
three- yeah, I only look at 3 things in early voting, and I added a 4th this year. The 4th I added was, could they replicate the mass mail-in voting of 2020 without the same cultural benefits and rule changes that they have, I think illegally
Yeah,
obtained in 2020?
yeah,
And the answer is that it's already that the answer is clear is no. The mail-in voting will be down nationwide by at least 50%, even though some states, California, Nevada, Florida, Arizona, Nevada, you have strong mail-in voting proclivity still present, or mail-in voting is the only way to vote. So, states like Georgia, it's down 90%. It's down 75% in a bunch of places. It's going to be down at least 25 or 30% in Pennsylvania. And that's why I was really curious. Could these Midwestern states that created this new method of voting that was uncommon to those areas that were not used to voting early,
yeah.
could
Pennsylvania,
they
Michigan, yeah,
sustain the same edge? People that don't remember, Biden walked in with a million plus voter edge in Pennsylvania on election
yeah,
night.
yeah.
And now his own people thought they had lost that edge until some very late ballots
Yeah.
came in.
Do you remember that? They
Oh,
were
yes.
actually in a total panic when they realized how big Trump's election day vote was going to be. When they themselves realized that it was going to be massive, they did not think they had enough. A couple of days before the election, I remember it like it was yesterday. Ron was running around, chicken with his head cut off. Holy shit, holy shit, holy shit. We're in deep trouble. We're in deep trouble. By the way, I just highlighted something on the screen as you were talking about it because I really think like this is key among the older voters that don't vote straight ticket in Nevada, right? These are true swing voters, about 16% overall. They back Trump by 14 points and they back Rosen by 20. So, like, I don't know about Brown. We'll see how it goes for Brown. At the end of the day, we don't see these massive split ticket victories anymore. We these massive margins. Maybe it does happen this year. I don't know. And the only reason why I'm thinking it is possible is because we're talking about Harris's closing argument, which is not motivating the people she expected to motivate. But now she went from like healthcare to this thing and that, they're all over the place. And then she seems to be settling on Trump is crazy. The people who know him best won't serve with him again. He's nuts. He can't be trusted with the Oval Office. That's problematic. It only speaks to a certain group of people that she's already has bled some with, right? But like the CSIG voter is not the same as it was in 2020. So we're looking at a different group of people. She cannot expand beyond her base with that message. Like that's it. And it's not even apparently exciting her base. But let's say you go in there and you're one of these people and you don't buy it from Harris and you're like, oh, she was the vice president. The years under Biden have been horrible. But, Trump is a little bit unpredictable. So I'm voting for Trump because he was a better president. And I know he already dealt with the Oval Office, but I do want to check on him. So I'll go with Rosen too. Like I can see like that voter existing. But I mean, there's just no way that she can win that state if that's it. Those are Dean Heller numbers from when Dean Heller won his Senate race by what, 3? Was it 3.5? Something like that. So like I would expect it to be a hair and closer, but I mean, the bottom line for me is there are so many things working against her. The true swing vote, the true persuasive vote has gone so far against her at this point. At first, it looked like maybe she could stop the bleeding like Biden had with these swing votes, but that's not the case. And then secondly, again, like I said, you need Republicans not to vote because they don't have the registration advantage in these states that they had in 2020. Forget about 2016. They don't have what they had in 2020. So when you're talking about building up a 20K vote firewall in Clark County, it's going to be a lot harder when that's basically your entire registration edge. What was it the last we looked at it? I'll have to go and look. I think it's like 20 something thousand or 30,000. So you're basically saying every record in your advantage is going to vote while Republicans are not.
Right. And that
Get
gets to
the
the
hell
point
out of here.
correct. And that gets to the point of what we were talking about is ways to measure. So the best point of early voting is not predictive margin, it's turnout of low propensity voters.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then you're looking at demographics, the racial split, number one. Number two, you're looking at the age split. And then three, where you have the individualized data, you're looking at, okay, who disproportionately low propensity voters are voting. If you have registration data, if you have good modeling data, that can be a little bit tricky, but if you have good modeling data, then by all three categories, Democrats are doing worse than they have done, as far as I can tell, since like the 1980s in certain contexts. To give people an idea, that the racial gap, white voters outvoting black voters, is usually around 7-8 points outside the Obama years. Obama years, black voters outvoted white voters. Outside of those two, and that's the only reason he won in 2012. And outside of that, it's usually a 7-8 point gap. Back in the 80s, pre like Jesse Jackson running in 1984 and things like that, the racial gap had gotten really big. Black voters had sort of dropped out of the electorate post 1968. And what happened is you had double-digit advantages of white voters compared to black voters in terms of turnout. And Hispanics have always turned out at a low rate. And there was some prediction that maybe that would normalize. What we're seeing in the data is a racial gap bigger than any time we've had since the 80s.
Bro, 20% in Georgia? Are you kidding
I mean,
me?
you're talking
Look
about
at North Carolina.
White voters outvoting black, like white voter turnout being something like, let's say hypothetically, white voter turnout at say 71% of voting eligible population, black turnout at say 60% or 59% or 58. You're double-digit gaps between the two. And in these states where Democrats rely on black voters, like Virginia, like Georgia, like North Carolina, it means they're DOA out of the gate. That even matters in part in Nevada. Northern Las Vegas has been other than Obama has always had low turnout. It looks like it's going to have a record low turnout. And when did this first show up?
It showed up. Oh, go ahead. I'll just get brand new numbers in Georgia in a second. Go ahead.
To our point earlier about voter registration, the first sign of voter enthusiasm. There's three signs I look at. The first is I look at voter intensity reported in polling data. Are you absolutely certain to vote? Are you paying extreme amount of attention to the election?
How interested are you? How enthusiastic are you? Yep.
And that was already flashing record level warning signs. Like the racial gap was double digits in Ipsos's own polling. Where there was almost no racial gap in 2020, you had 14, 15-point racial gaps, 30 to 40-point age gaps, like elderly, 80% interested, young vote under 35, less than 40% interested.
Yeah.
I mean, you're seeing an age gap that we only saw in parts of 2012 and some of the midterms under Obama. So the Hispanic, younger millennial Hispanic interest dropping off drastically. Then that was the first time we saw it. Second time we saw it was in the voter registration data. That's why Richard and I went over it with you. That all over the place, it was many of these groups that were not registering to vote. Were dropping off Democratic alignment with rolls. And this was, it was all over the Black Belt throughout the South, all over the Black Belt. I mean, the biggest declines in North Carolina for Democratic voter edge was in the Black Belt, was in the Tar Heel country. It was not in anywhere. When I read that, saw that, I was like, holy moly. And now we're seeing it in the mail-in voting data and the early live in-person voting data. Same pattern all over the place. And it doesn't matter where you look. It doesn't matter if you look Virginia, Georgia, North Carolina, Louisiana, Nevada. Doesn't matter. Arizona.
Everywhere. It's everywhere.
It's the same pattern. And so now we can, and then Mark Halperin, to his credit, was live this morning saying, confirming this. So if you have any doubts about,
he was out.
He said the early voting is so strongly for Trump that we may know Trump is the winner before Election Day. That's Mark Halperin, who never
before Election Day. Yeah, I mean, theoretically, I understand what he's saying, absolutely. But what's going to happen, and I caution everybody with the exit polls, even if they look good for your side, to take them with a grain. Look, for instance, in 2016, 2018, 2020, they looked way worse for Republicans than they actually were. In 22, they looked way better for Republicans than they actually were, although I think that's quite bullshit. But here's the most recent out of Georgia by race, and then I will show you a inference modeling of those who have already returned the ballot overall in Michigan. Okay. Georgia, in-person early vote update as of an hour ago. 65% white, 22% black. folks, at this time, and that ticked up among African American because of Sunday's Souls to the Polls. That's a real thing. But at this time in 2020, Black voters were over 33% of the overall early vote. They eventually got pulled down to about a third, about 30%, but they were touching 40. And around this time, they were touching 40s routinely, 40% of the early vote. Now they are 22%. And what's going to happen? It's like we're all being asked, and this is why Mark actually, if he said that, he's right, bro, because like we're all being asked to believe that Democrats are suddenly going to be late in election day voters. I would be skeptical if this changed like around, what is it, it's October 22nd. Let's say this next week there may be a burst for Democrats, but that will be it. I mean, that'll essentially be it. This Sunday, I would expect a burst for Democrats. But again, they're so far behind where they need to be that is simply not enough, because the other side of the math for them is not working. And that is Republicans are voting too. Republicans have made such big registration gains. This is what Ralston's not telling people. They have made, for instance, in that state, they've made such big registration gains. It's not enough to build that firewall anymore. It's not enough, because Republicans will vote, of course, more heavily on election day or closer to. And guess what? They have a comparable pool of registered voters to draw from. Democrats used to have this pool. Think of it as like a folks like a well or a spring that you have in your backyard, where like if the world goes to shit, you're always going to have fresh water you could go to if you need more. Democrats always had that spring, that well in the backyard where they could go. They had it in Florida for years, and starting in like 16, I was arguing it's not there anymore. It's not what it used to be. So you're interpreting this early vote data all wrong. And that happened, by the way. Hillary put up, according to Tony Boner at Target Fart, she put up the best performance for a Democrat, even better than Barack Obama in 2016. And she went on to lose. And by the way, remember, Robert, we showed this. His research said 20+% of Republicans who voted early were going to, already did vote for Hillary Clinton. All right. This is what a scam this guy is. I challenged everybody to go and find an election cycle where Mr. Boner and Target Fart were not giving their analysis that was bullish or pro-democratic. You can't find one. You will never find a year where, at least Ralston, you can find it, Robert, where it's like, all right, this isn't great for Democrats. Of course, he always somehow spins it at the end to make it better for them. But he went in to 22, freaking fly. He went into 22 acting like what's her name? Cortez Masto was going to run away with that Senate race because they hit their firewall. She won by 0.2%, dude, right? I mean, this is not even that anymore. 2 years later, they don't even have that advantage. And then here's Michigan. This friggin' fly is going to drive me nuts. I'm going to be like Mike Pence over here. This flies. Here's Michigan. I mean, again, it's inference modeling. It's I just decided to draw who returned their ballots today. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, I just decided to draw. Look at this. Holy crap. Even if we gave Democrats every single inferred unknown, they couldn't catch Republicans. I mean, I'm not saying that's how it's going to go on election. He's not going to win by that margin. Just understand what I'm saying here. What I'm saying is, even if Democrats surge, they still have to play catch up. And that is a response to all the people going, but what about Wayne County, Rich? What about it? He got 30% of the vote in Wayne County. He got 27% in our poll in 2020. He's in the 30s now in our polling, and he could crack 35% in Wayne County. So what? What's your point?
And especially, it's not who they needed it to be. In other words,
right. It's not.
They needed their early vote to come from. There's a phrase called
low to no,
cannibalizing the early vote. That's when people who have always voted are just voting earlier than normal.
That's right.
So those voters you frankly just don't really care about. What you're looking at is people who voted for in 0 of the last 4 elections or 1 of the last 4 elections. And especially I like the 0 out of the last 4, depending on which demographic they're in. And when you look at that data, those that are tracking that data, Republicans are beating Democrats by 2-1 margins all over the place. It doesn't matter which state it is.
In Pennsylvania, the best day for Democrats, okay, of those, because again, Boner from Target Fart talking about, oh, Republicans are have more percentage of their ballots of people who voted on election day. And I'm like, well, of course, dumbass. Democrats didn't vote on election day in 2020. So of course, Republicans are going to have a larger share of their early vote being election day voters. The process isn't about that. The process is whether or not you're getting low to no propensity out. And among that, best day for Democrats was like 25 to 20%, meaning those ballots that were returned, though, 20% of the ballots for Democrats said they did not vote in 2020. It was like one of the best days, and it was still a day when Republicans were like 25. So again, the AP, CNN, I've shared these articles with viewers of Inside the Numbers, all mocking 10x votes, all mocking Elon Musk, right? And his get out the vote. Oh, this is unconventional, going after these low propensity voters who don't vote or really, don't forget about not on election day, don't vote at all. What the Republicans were trying to do was what people like you and I have been arguing for a while. You're winning for once the no to low propensity vote. Get them on the permanent absentee, and get them in the bank so they're out of the way for your 4 out of 4, your 3 out of 4, meaning, folks, they vote 4 out of 4 of the last elections. They voted 3 out of 4 of the last elections. So Democrats are cannibalizing at a higher rate. It's not we're not talking about raw numbers. We're talking about the percentage of that vote that is a cannibalized vote. Republicans are getting more people who say, I did not vote in 2020. So it's weird because you have this like phenomena, Robert, where Republicans are getting that more, and a huge group from that did vote for Biden in 2020. These the Nate Cohen group he was always going on about. Remember that? 16% is going to be this new voter, right? They're not voting. So it's like this double whammy that's happening to Democrats. And again, that says nothing. We're just talking about partisanship data, folks. That says nothing of the people who are telling every pollster from Big Data Poll to the New York Times that they voted for Biden in 2020 and are now voting for Trump. So there's no statistical significance in the number of Trump voters who are now voting for Harris. So they have all of these mountains to climb. Robert, I'm telling you, man, I just don't see it. I don't know how they would turn this around in less than 2 weeks, if 13 days.
Essentially, what's happening is the group we've been talking about swinging the electorate, which are younger working class minorities and millennials and Zoomers, that essentially the mind that they have made up on is one of two paths. If they're democratically inclined, they're just not voting at disproportionate rates.
Yeah.
I mean, thus there's the popular social media reference in parts of the Black community to saying couch 2024. That's a bit of a rebellion against the Democratic Party brand. And then you have them trying to gaslight Black voters door to door, like got viral a couple of days ago, where a young Black voter came out and said, I was like, look, I'm actually leaning Trump because of the economy and immigration. And the people talking to him said, oh, that's all fake. That's all fake. There's no problem on immigration. There's no problem on crime. There's no problem in me. You bought it in fake news.
Unbelievable.
All this does is outrage people like that even more when you gaslight them in such an obvious and overt
lying
manner
to them. You're lying.
The second part of that group, the part that's actually participating, is disproportionately participating on the Trump side. And this included unusual registration trends in those communities of Republican in states that register by party more aggressively. And then some of their motor voter registrations that Target Smart was relying upon, those people aren't voting at all. They got stuck in those states on voter rolls. They don't care. The only ones who are voting that are in that group are the ones that are modeled or leaning or registered Republican.
Yeah.
So that's where. So all the early voting data is pointing in the same direction. And the person who can't incorporate it because his model is so utterly unsophisticated that it's about as good at predicting political outcomes as it was at predicting sports outcomes.
Fake model.
Exactly. Nate Silver's out there telling everybody that his models have beat the prediction markets, and they always beat the betting markets. And I was like, that's funny, because I've been around this whole time.
This freaking guy.
And even in 2012, go back and look. At different times, he thought Romney might win it. I mean, this mythology was based on him just relying, as Richard points out, on Obama's pollster and believing him. Obama's pollster, by the way, was also wrong. He was wrong all the way through. Their internal polling was not predicting a huge black vote disproportionate to the white vote. They were predicting the wrong electorate all the way through. Their data was wrong all the way through. That's why his data was so bad in 2016. But go back and look at what his model predicted in the margin of victory. He overstated the Democratic margin of victory by several points, by an average of 3 points or more in every single state in back-to-back presidential elections.
Yep.
I mean, that's how bad his model was. If you look at a disparity, and it was when his model was different than the betting markets in terms of margin of victory, probability of victory, a bunch of those factors, by state, by electoral college, whatever you want to put it in. And when his model was more bullish on a candidate than the market. Fact one, his model has almost always been more bullish on the Democratic candidate than the betting market.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
In fact, there's people out there. This is a fun little social media thing they've come up with. One of these guys came up with it. He said, if you track silver, watch the prediction markets, the betting markets, silver will match it just 5 days later. He called it the silver lag time. He goes, somehow magically, silver's independent model, always ends up imitating the election and betting markets 5 days later. If you have an honest model of whatever it's based on, that should not be that predictable that that's what you're doing. So, but if you bet on silver, whenever he had a meaningful difference than the betting markets, you would have lost money every single time in every single major electoral contest going back to 2016 and even parts of 2012, because his model was constantly wrong where the prediction markets were right. So I even put out there, the betting markets were saying Romney was going to win. That's a complete lie. I was in those betting markets. Right. They were overwhelmingly for Obama. Dude. By 2 to 1, you had to bet late $2 to win $1.
The revisionism is unbelievable. Do you remember in 2020, speaking of Florida, which I was just showing you guys, we had leading up to the election explained to people not only different groups, but like he was obsessing over the early vote. He was obsessing all over the betting markets,
which he now says all the smart people know not to follow unless it's John.
Now Morrison. He says, but back then it was all about the early vote, all about the betting market. And we were trying to explain, I still have the charts. We were trying to explain. We asked people who they were going to vote for and by what method and when. We not only knew who was going to win the state, we knew which vote categories each candidate was going to win and by what dates were they winning larger margins, because late arriving mail-in ballots were going better for Donald Trump than those that were cast 2-3 weeks before the election. We knew that in-person early voting was going to be heavily for Trump. We knew election day voting, right? And that's when he took his little tantrum and, it's like, oh, the betting markets are people, they're not going to be that wrong. They're going to lose that much money. I'm not entertaining this shit. I'm going out and walking my dog. And I'm like, you go walk, Fifi, bro. And when you come back, Donald Trump will have won the state. All right. This was like unbelievable. He has I guess what I'm trying to say is like there's year to year no consistency in what he prioritizes or what he argues. Whatever he needs to use to argue the point that he already has drawn his conclusion, whatever he needs, it uses as a tool. Next year, it could be something that he doesn't deem credible, or the following year after that, it could be something that he told you the year prior was not a credible way to gauge an election. He has zero consistency, none whatsoever. And I mean, I honestly think that you were right. I remember this episode a couple of weeks ago when we were talking about what is Nate Silver doing this cycle? Like, what exactly is he playing at? You nailed it, man. He is a clickbait scam artist trying to remain relevant. He duped the Trump voter in coming and listening and looking at his model because he wants the clicks and he wants to remain relevant. And then the only reason that he's twisting it now back to Trump after showing these artificial surges to Harris is because he really can't even keep the game up himself anymore. Like, that's how bad this is. Folks, when he was still the nominee and the New York Times was coming out with Trump plus sixes, 538, his old employer, his old website where he's been fired from, 538 still had Biden up. Now they have Harris down. Not even 538 can keep up this scam when they included the Washington Post polls that we shredded to pieces yesterday on the show. So he has no choice. You know what I'm saying? Like, even his old website is got Trump favored to win this thing now. So it's like it would be almost impossible, Robert, if his goal is what you originally stated, and I think you knocked it out of the park. You were 100% correct. He can't go into this thing projecting that Harris is the likely winner. He'll keep it close to play games and give Harris voters hope, like all the pollsters are doing here. But
if they drop the Trump emails, they'll say late surge, changing news. Harris now takes back the lead. There'll be something like that. But you're right. He won't want to be real out of whack with the betting markets because they're so much better than he is at predicting the trend of an election. Now, they're not perfect. That's how I make money betting into them because they rely on the Silvers of the world too much, and it dilutes what should be a more natural Trump edge.
Right.
And as we predicted, as soon as it became broadly legalized here in the U.S., when they won against the Biden administration, and this was why the Biden administration was trying to prohibit U.S. People from being able to easily access the betting markets, like Kalshi, like Interactive Brokers, now to go on with Bet Online, Bet US, Polymarket, Predict It, and the rest. What happened? Floods of money for Trump from ordinary, everyday people. In fact, as the people at Kalshi and Polymarket have reported, a lot of their top people actually watch this show, by the way. So the said
apparently
they went and did this. Yeah, exactly. Went and did the study. They said the bet coming in for Trump are disproportionately small dollar bets, not big dollar bets. It's the Harris bets. Sometimes people trying to manipulate those markets back.
Flooding the markets.
That are their big bet. That's it. What's funny is Wall Street Journal does this big hit piece. Oh, Trump must be up because of Republican manipulation of the betting markets. And it's like, okay, no, that if you know anything about those betting markets, it's Democrats that are manipulating those markets, not Republicans or trying to.
Yeah.
And now there's just too much cash coming in from ordinary, everyday people, middle class kind of people, upper middle class people, but not the super rich. They're like, hey, I know in my community, Harris is dead. Trump is going to win because they're hearing Trump things from people they've never heard it from.
Yeah.
They're seeing a social permission slip to embrace Trump in ways that was never the case in prior elections. They can go to certain places wearing a MAGA hat and not get thrown out, not get spit on, not get attacked, not get verbally demonized. All the right. And then you look at, apparently from the chat, Trump's going to be on Rogan on Friday.
He is. There's a lot breaking since we've been talking. He's going on Rogan. By the way, this is announced a week after rumors surfaced that Harris would in fact do Rogan, and then she pulled it back after the disastrous interview with Bret Baier and CBS News. By the way, CBS News is just not releasing any of this footage. That's how bad that interview must have went. And by the way, the woman wants to be, I can't even believe we're having these discussions, Robert. The woman wants to be president of the United States. She can't take a modicum of the pressure that she really deserves from someone like Bret Baier. Like, she faced a fraction of the scrutiny that she's deserved and, is warranted from Bret Baier. And they went on a total bitching fest. And by the way, they showed up, and a lot of people don't know this. They showed up to that studio late as hell. And it is very difficult to do an interview with a high-profile candidate like that, or a high-profile person at all, and then ask your team to turn around that interview in less than an hour, which is what they did to Bret. They totally sandbagged him. And yet, they did it. They got it done. They put it up, and they were bitching that he didn't, edit it out to make her look better or something. Maybe if he would have showed up on time, his team would have had more time to do that. Maybe they would have, in fact, been receptive to doing it. But, yep, it didn't go her way. So then she canceled Joe Rogan, and this interview is being announced just this a week to the day that she bailed out of the Rogan interview. By the way, also developing since we've been on Gallup and their metrics that matter updated their favorability for both these candidates. They have, and you're gonna shit, brother. Let me just make sure I get the numbers right here. Let me bring it back up. They have Trump and Harris favorables. Harris is -2, 48-50. Trump is +2, 50-48. Yeah, right on their front page, metrics that matter, which Robert and I have talked about. Oh, and I got to show you this. There it is. There's your updated Gallup party ID with leaners versus the result. We don't have the margin or the error, obviously. That's to be determined. But the final quarterly party average, Robert, R+3.
Yeah, which would forecast if under the traditional metrics in which has been done,
Yeah.
A 3 to 4 point Trump victory. And again, Gallup's data has been consistent on this now for many cycles, particularly in the partisan era, the post 2004 era, where the
Yeah.
parties sort of locked in on cultural identity. Before that, you had a lot of ancestral Democrats voting Republican, et cetera. So I like the Gallup data 04 forward, but especially post 04. So 08, 12, 16, 20, it's been ridiculously predictive. And then the underlying reasons why it's predictive are what's the top issue, who's the best party or candidate on that issue. And there again, Trump dominating, as we talked about all the way back in August. Yeah, to wrap up Nate Silver calls himself the Moneyball of American politics. He's the Moneyball of American politics with this version of the Oakland A's, not Bobby Bean's version of the Oakland A's, with one of the laughably worst teams in all of baseball. That's what he's the equal of. But so that will dispatch with Nate Silver, the king of cons, and transitioning into my predictions for 2024, which you can go back and watch I think it was late July, early August episode. Yep. I went through and gave my popular vote, electoral vote, margin of victory comparisons, gave some of the states. I'll give all 50 states here. But to give you some of the underlying demographics, not only are they not getting that unusual surge of Yankee support in the Northeast that Biden got in 2020, not getting that youth growth, suburban radical improvement between 2016 and 2020. That's not happening again in 2024. That's not showing up anywhere in any of the data, not in the registration data, the early voting data, the intention to vote data, the margin of victory data, anywhere, but using like-to-like polling surveys.
In fact, it's worse. Because
absolutely.
Trump underperforms in the polls when you're talking about like suburban educated white voters. He does better in the vote than he does in the polls. He's done it twice now. We always talk about the non-college vote. She is not even polling as well as Joe Biden was, let alone expected to perform as well as he did. Right? So when they make those comparisons, which stress what Robert is saying, CBS did it too with their YouGov. They compared it to what the Edison Research exit polls, and that is irrelevant. The pre-election polls for Biden were much stronger than they are among all of these groups than they are for Harris. She's not even doing as well against Trump with white college educated voters. So it is, while it is true that past isn't always prologue. I would argue to people that, like, of course, it's much more likely that he outperforms with these groups again, especially given that, honestly, we saw more excitement for Hillary Clinton. Can we cut the shit? We did. It was artificial. The balloon popped. And now look at the catastrophic data that's staring everyone in the face. With the exception of the boners of the world, folks, everyone privately acknowledges how bad this is for her right now. I'll leave it at that.
Absolutely.
And publicly, and many publicly, by the way. But go ahead, let's get in here.
No doubt. So, I mean, and to give one other little bit of context as to, why I was predicting Trump +2 all the way back in late July, early August, when Harris was at her peak. Some of the underlying data that as you've talked about, a big Democratic popular vote edge comes from the big states, the New York and California especially, and then being competitive or more competitive in Florida and Texas.
Yeah. Here we are.
Like take in both California and New York, Harris is performing even worse relative to how she's falling off nationwide. And I dug into the data, and here's why. In California, she is badly underperforming Biden's numbers using like-to-like polls, people that have polled California multiple cycles, the public whatever group and the other ones. And their like-to-like data has Harris as much as 20 points behind in voter margin amongst Mexican-American and Black voters. And one interesting point about Mexican-American voters, in California, they didn't swing as much from 16 to 20 as other Mexican-American voters did across the country.
Yet still, because of them, inched California 5 points to the right from 2016. People don't realize that. California and New Jersey actually inched to the right while the country went to the left. All right. All right, just two big blue
Yeah.
states, high population states. He's going to
And
win the
right
Central
now,
Valley this time, bro. He is.
she's going to underperform in California and New York more so than she even does nationwide. In New York, I dug into the data. Here you have Siena that's been polling there forever, and you use their like-to-like data, not post-election data, not exit poll
Yeah,
data.
right.
Like-to-like data of Siena.
That's right.
They haven't drastically changed their polling methodologies that they do in the state of New York. And I was looking, okay, why is Harris doing so poorly relative to Biden in Siena's polling in New York? And historically, Siena's polling, by the way, has overstated the Democratic margin, not understated it.
And Trump at 32% or 30% or something.
Oh,
He got
they're being
38%
crushed.
of the vote. Yeah.
The amongst independent voters, Harris is doing 22 points worse in margin than Trump. Amongst men, 18 points worse. Amongst Catholics, 20 points worse.
In the 5
Amongst
boroughs.
amongst
10 points.
Latinos in the boroughs, 20 points worse. Amongst millennials and Zoomers, 40 points worse in margin of victory.
Jeez.
Amongst Jewish voters, 40 points worse in terms of margin of victory. And this, by some of your data was the first to pick up on this.
Yeah.
I've now seen over
Lots.
30 poll data points that show there's going to be double-digit. I mean, Jewish voters are still going to vote Democrat, but it's not going to be the 60, 70-point margin they traditionally give Democrats. It's going to be more like a 20-point margin. And in some states like New York and New Jersey, it's accented. And now you add in some of the media's own Arab and Muslim voting polling data. And it has Trump in some places winning that vote. Now, I don't think that will happen.
The YouGov, what's it called, poll that just came out. That was nationwide, though, of Arab Americans. It's actually Trump plus 2 or 3, which is insane.
Yeah.
Even if he doesn't do that, Robert, it's insane.
I mean, even if
that
it's
he's
a
doing
huge,
that much better.
traditionally, for those that don't know, Muslims, huge Democratic voter constituency. And what it is if you look at where is their Arab and Muslim vote that's high relative to national population.
Yeah.
Now, in states that can matter, Michigan and Minnesota, but in states that, when I'm looking at the popular vote margin, also matter, it's New York and New Jersey. So you have an overrepresentation of Jewish voters in both states. You have an overrepresentation of Arab and Muslim voters in both states. Basically, trying to walk the line on Israel and Palestine just lost both sides.
Yeah.
That's all it ever did. It's what we said was going to happen beforehand. And Harris can't get out of her own way. So that's where I think in California, due to Latinos, Black voters, and younger voters, in New York, due to the same pattern, but add to that, that's why, like, some of the New York numbers have been wild. I mean, you're talking about Trump getting that into the low double digits, even the single digits. I mean, you're talking about double-digit improvement off of 2020. But when I looked in, I saw why. Because she's losing the same group she's losing in Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. Catholics, independents, men in upstate New York. She's losing the same group she's losing California, Arizona, Nevada, Florida, and Texas. Latino voters, Black voters, younger minority, millennial, Zoomer voters. But in New York, you add to that bleeding Jewish votes, bleeding Muslim votes, bleeding Arab votes. All of a sudden, you see how she might end up in single digits in New York. I don't think it'll get that bad.
The Siena poll today. They got her back up in the high teens. I just want to say that is a bit of a hat tip that they're about to drop bullshit in the rest of the states. Like, they're going to come up with a national poll that's kind of close, and then they're going to show that Harris is a path in these states. They are. They're going to show her getting blown out in Florida if they repoll it. Maybe they'll give her a 1-point edge in North Carolina. This is what they do. Folks, they gave Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden both a 6-point lead in North Carolina. In 16 and 20, they gave both of them a lead in Florida between 3 and 6 points. So the New York Times actually had Joe Biden winning Iowa by a single point. I mean, so it's a hat tip. The Siena poll being back to like Harris plus, I think it's 16 or 18 in New York. That's a hat. I'm just telling you, and I'm saying this to warn everybody now. They're going to do a finagled bullshit to try to give people the impression that Harris is a path here. My opinion is that they would better serve their readers by telling them the truth right now. Because, Robert, what happens when liberals lose an election they don't expect to lose? It's like January 6th. Give me a break. Nobody remembers them turning over cars and burning down businesses in D.C. during Inauguration Day. Before that, when he was the president-elect, nobody remembers them in every major city, burning shit down. I mean, come on, man. Give me a break. I guess it's because they didn't enter like the Capitol Police didn't let them in to Congress, so I guess that supposedly somehow makes it worse what Republicans did on January 6th. I mean, very, very organized calamity. That is what we're in for if they don't begin to tell these people the truth right now. I watched a grown man sit on his ass like a 5-year-old child and sob on a tennis court. I watched grown women bent over the front desk of a preschool just hysterically crying. All right. I mean, this is not normal behavior. You brought up Mark Halpern before, and I ran a clip about it earlier last week. Man, he's absolutely right. There's going to be like a mass mental breakdown if these people do not start prepping their voters now. Morning Joe puts on the only bullshit poll he can find this morning, AP NORC. Bro, they had Clinton winning by 13 and Biden winning by 14. It's the worst, one of the worst polls out there. And of course, they're running all of that this morning in the favorability ratings. And not hours later, Gallup comes out with actual numbers and shows that actually it's a 4-point edge favoring Trump. And he's actually more popular than Harris is right now. No shit, Sherlock. Everybody knows this. Everybody knows he's had an image makeover. Even the Harris campaign knows it. But Morning Joe is going to mislead their Maddow nutcase, like Bellevue patients who are then going to run wild in their aprons after election night when they get a result that they're not expecting. Can we please just be honest with the Bellevue patients before the election happens? I mean, honestly, man, like no matter who wins or loses, like there's got to be some stability to this damn country, Robert, before this all just comes down. Like we can't keep doing this every election, brother. Not to go on a tangent about it, but no, we cannot keep doing this, man. We have got to come and settle down to some, like looking at this map. How could you not see that Donald Trump has a considerable number of paths, whereas she has one, maybe two, if you're being super, super bullish on her, right? Maybe 1, 2, because the other ones don't make sense. We're all supposed to believe the Rust Belt and the Northern Midwest, the Great Lakes states, Trump's going to sweep them. Yet he's going to lose Georgia and Arizona. When the Atlanta Journal-Constitution just dropped their final, and it shows twice the lead over Harris he has than he had over Clinton in 2016. In their poll. And by the way, they were Biden +1 in 2020. So it's like you cannot argue with them when they come out with a Trump +4. It was only Trump +2 in 2016 over Clinton. And by the way, if you do some basic math on the early voting Robert was just talking about, assuming all counties vote identical, which is a big assumption because obviously we have Biden voters now voting for Trump. We have no Trump voters voting for Harris. But let's just pretend and play along for the sake of Harris and her supporters' mental health. Let's just throw that to them and give it to them. Let's make that assumption. Based on the early vote right now, if every county voted the way they voted in 2020, Trump is still ahead right now in Georgia by about 5 points. So just a little bit more, because it's like 4.8, just a little bit more than the Atlanta Journal-Constitution poll has him up.
Yeah, I mean, I think.
Where's the path then, Robert? What's her most likely path? Let's turn this around for a second. Let me ask you that. What do you think before you give your predictions? Because what do you think her most likely path is? If she was to win, how would she do it?
It's entirely the Rust Belt because I think what you're seeing from the racial dynamics is the South is gone.
Dude.
And the Sun Belt by itself can't get her there. So if I were the Democratic campaign, I'd put all resources into the Midwest. Everything in the Pennsylvania. In fact, if I were running her campaign,
you got to sweep it. All three.
I would have her spending every day in just those 3 states.
She's not even on the trail today.
I know. Walz every day in just those 3 states. Obama every day in just those 3 states. Bill Clinton every day. If you can get him to not.
I don't know about Obama. He's not.
Obama, you sending him to liberal and black areas with college students in black. That's what you send him to Madison. You send him to Milwaukee. Then you send him to Detroit, and you send him to Ann Arbor. And you send them up to where Michigan State is. You send them over to Grand Rapids. Then you send them into Philly suburbs over and over again. Maybe stop in Harrisburg, stop at where Penn State is, and then back all over again. And if I was pushing for, and for Harris, it would be everywhere. For Walz, it would be everywhere, but probably more rural, small town areas where he tries to pretend and do on his act.
Yeah.
But I would be that would be those states alone, and I wouldn't be hammering democracy. Abortion's just a slight winner for them. It just doesn't matter to move the needle enough. I mean, what they needed was also an October surprise, like a positive one, a peace deal in Europe, a peace deal in the Middle East. Go do something dramatic on the border. Go do like mass arrest of all the Venezuelan gang members in the United States. Create a bunch of controversy over whether you're violating their civil rights or not. So you can get attention as how you're going to be tough and different because you're the prosecutor. That routine. That's what I would be doing in terms of path. Now, here's what I have. The only revisions I've really made, because I generally don't make revisions once I make those predictions. I'm making predictions based on forecasting what I think is going to happen. 2020 was the only one where my number moved a lot because of the pandemic problem. That the lockdown just changed everything, what mail-in voting meant. The economy was gone. It created a sense of chaos after there had been domestic bliss with lower immigration, less risk of war. Like all of Trump's Trump cards were gone because of the pandemic. Could he recover them back? He almost did, but that made the predictions very, very tight. And people have kind of selective memory. I mean, you can go back and look at the pre-election episode I did with Richard, went through all the different betting markets, all the different odds. We won on a whole bunch of them, by the way, on margins of victory, et cetera. Well, the predictions here were Baris's polls were dead on, and my predictions were much more accurate than any other modeler out there. Everybody else was predicting Biden by 8.5.
By landslide.
Biden electoral college landslide. Said Biden might flip Texas.
Biden was going to win level landslides. Right. Nate Silver, Florida, North Carolina, Texas. These were blue. Iowa and Ohio were teetering on blue because of the New York Times.
That's absolutely right. And that was both 2016, 2020. I mean, 2016, he said Hillary was going to win Ohio. So in 2016, he said Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin would be more Democratic than the rest of the country. It wasn't just getting it wrong in terms of who won it. It was wrong in terms of the way it was trending, how the voters were grouped. I mean, everything was wrong.
Everything.
And that's why I've been offering to bet him. Open opportunity still out there for years since early 2016. He's not had the cojones to bet me ever. That tells you everything you need to know about Nate Silver. The only time he's ever accepted a bet is a bet that he just admitted last week he planned to hedge. He planned to bet against himself because there was a guaranteed profit in the market. So, I mean, this is the kind of guy that Donald Trump has a history of grabbing, put it that way. So that's the true nature of Nate Silver. But so to my prediction, the only thing I've changed is I was still, despite the registration trends, despite the certainty to vote, likelihood to vote, intensity of interest, et cetera, despite the social media things that I follow in terms of activity and interactivity in terms of the election, all forecasting we would return to pre-2020, pre-2018, pre-Trump era election trends. In other words, we were averaging around 60% of the voting eligible population voting. That spiked to 67% or thereabouts in 2020. But we also had unusual midterm turnout in both 2018 and 2022. So I looked at that and thought, well, I'll split the baby and say we'll come in around 63% of turnout. I'm now back to, I think we're going to get 2016 level turnout backwards. I mean, and maybe even be a little worse than that because of how what's trending with these disillusioned Democratic constituencies, minorities, millennials, and Zoomers.
Could collapse totally. Yeah,
so
it could.
I'm
Absolutely.
currently predicting that we'll get around 61% turnout. I think it'll be about 100, and I'm still above what some forecasters. A lot of forecasters are saying 144 million votes, 145 million.
Yeah,
I have it at 149 million, but down from where I did have it. I think 106 million white voters, non-Hispanic white voters, 17 million non-Hispanic black voters, 16 million Hispanic voters. Hispanic voters had a chance to outvote black voters. That still may happen, but only because of decline in black vote. But Hispanic voter interest amongst millennials and Zoomers that are democratically inclined, way low.
Way down.
I mean, it's worse than 2016 numbers. Asian vote, around 7 million voters. And then these are people that are mixed race, Native American, et cetera, around 3 million total votes.
Yeah. So,
and the total will basically, and that's so out of 160 million non-Hispanic whites, I think 106 million will vote. But I think we'll barely get to half of the Black, Hispanic, Asian, other vote in terms of voting age population turnout. Some of these people are not citizens, but a bunch of them are not registered. Like in 2020, there was drastic improvements in voter registration in democratically aligned constituencies. It's been just the opposite in 2024. So here's what margin I have. I have Trump winning the white non-Hispanic vote by 15 points. I have him losing the black, and this is almost identical to where I had it back in August. So I've just changed how many people are voting within these groups, but not the margins. Black vote, Trump loses by 65.
Yeah.
Trump loses the Hispanic vote by
Yeah.
15, losing the Asian vote by 25, and then the other by 15. He's made it. I mean, we'll see how it translates, but there's been interesting growth. Like Native Americans may be a Trump trending group, right? Still may
Oh,
vote
look at
Democrat.
Arizona. Look at even the primary in Arizona. It would jumped. If you couldn't see that in the most the Navajo Nation areas, Biden was doing the worst. Trump was doing significantly better. There were clearly voters in there that were just not expected Republican primary voters. And the polling suggests that as well, like Apache and other areas where there are pockets. We're just not seeing the margins like Biden enjoyed. So, and by the way, I don't think Biden was going to get him either. I think Biden just would have done better with certain white voters. And I don't know that it would have helped with
Catholic, with
black
people that look like him, with all the people they
and
thought made
sound
him a
like
bad
him
candidate.
and hold their values. Like everyone was shocked that she snubbed the Al Smith dinner. Bro, she's not a Christian. Her own mother said she never, ever identified as a Christian. She absolutely, and this is not a dig on anybody, but it's amazing to me, and it has been, I've been tweeting about it, and I get some lovely responses. It's amazing to me that the candidate's faith isn't an issue at all this cycle. Nobody in the media, right or left, has brought this up. Well, guess what? She doesn't hold Christian faith at all. And this isn't something we can talk about. I mean, she's a good pretender, but I mean, her family knows it. I mean, this is somebody who identified with Hinduism over anything else. And she's not even particularly spiritual at that. So it's just amazing to me that, like, we went every year. I'm not trying to do this to be divisive, Robert. I'm simply saying, like, every year, a candidate's faith, what their belief systems mattered. And we didn't have a single discussion over it this time around. In 2016, we did talk about it. What is Trump? He's winning these evangelicals. What is he? At least Hillary pretends to be a Christian, right? How could he be doing so well when he's this like barbaric, crass guy, used to be pro-choice. And then in 2020, of course, they touted the shit out of Biden being a Catholic. Now they don't want to talk about it at all. They don't want to talk about it because, of course, she's not a Christian. And it's like amazing. This has not been in public discourse. I don't even think the race would be as, and I'm not saying it's close. I'm saying, like, I think it would be even worse for her had we had the usual debate over the role of faith in a leader's decision-making process. But we have completely excluded that discussion this year because everybody knows that Kamala Harris is not a Christian. All right. And God forbid they tell the American public there is a non-Christian running for president. And that's the truth. I'm not trying to be a dick. I'm not trying to be divisive. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with being a Hindu. I'm simply saying
the kind of voter Biden got back from Hillary, that Hillary lost, that Harris is
Bill
losing.
Clinton voter.
It's also like a classic Biden vote. In other words, how did Biden describe Indians? He goes, a lot of them really run 7-Elevens really well.
Yep.
That's who they are. And they're like, hold on a second. One of them is going to be president? I mean, that's just the dynamic, whether you like it or not, of that. But by the way, that'll be a big part of the post-election script. It will be bias, bigotry, and chauvinism and misogyny give Trump a victory. But what do you think on my turnout metrics? Do you think 61%, higher, lower, about right? Where would you
I think that's if this was a month ago, I would have argued we're probably looking more at like 63, 63 and a half. But I don't know, man. I mean, the only caveat is that Republicans, there's an unknown here, and that is the Republican election day vote. This is the thing, right? So Democrats are voting right now early. That is their preferred method, and they're just not voting at the rates that we would expect. So if both parties voted roughly in line with what we're seeing now, then you're looking at like 61%, maybe 60 and a half, right? I mean, that's what you're looking at. But if Republicans do what they do, like what they've done in 20 anyway, I mean, they could really boost these numbers. And then this thing is like over. I mean, over. And by the way, I'm looking at Florida. And we actually expanded the way we ask vote preference and vote method in states like Florida. So we're just being a little bit more specific, and I'll read it to you because it does tell me that there's a possibility that it's not a like, of course, there's gonna be more early vote for Republicans and a drop off, but I think a lot of people are expecting massive decline in election day participation among Republicans, and I'm telling you, it's possible it's not as big as people expect, that decline, the decline. It won't be as big as people expect, and then, I mean, you could, conceivably see it higher, but yeah, we expanded it to this: already voted early via absentee ballot by mail. Right? And that's always been something. Already voted early via absentee ballot and drop off location. Already voted early in person. Plan to vote before election day via absentee ballot by mail. Plan to vote before election day via absentee ballot and drop off. Plan to vote on election day via absentee ballot and drop off on election day, not before. And then plan to vote in person on election day. I mean, we're still seeing a majority say they plan to vote on election day. So, like, that could end up being man, let's say 52%, like let's just call it 52. That's really not that far off from 2020. So all it would mean is that Republicans got a significant number of people to vote to get them on the permanent absentee ballot list, get those votes in, encourage them to vote early, and they still have a massive deluge headed our way. And if that's true, I mean, we could see high Democrats would need to really make a last minute push though, Rob 3 and change, like they would need to do that too, because Republicans can't do it alone. But I don't see us hitting anywhere near 2020 at this point. I did once upon a time, I did. But that's really now based on I didn't have a presupposition here, but like now I believe that if Biden was the nominee, Democrats would be voting at higher rates. I really do believe that. I do now. That this like surge for Harris of enthusiasm was totally fake. Like now that even the donors know, even many Democratic donors are now know and will tell you that God, we replaced Joe Biden with the only candidate who could do worse than Joe Biden. Like they will privately acknowledge that now. At least we know Joe was getting people to the polls. Like in primary elections throughout this cycle, winning the nomination, he was getting more vote than people expected him to get. It wasn't great, and Democrats they had a problem. You could see it, but it was better than people expected given how bad his numbers were. And everything was fake, man. I don't know how else to put it. And I said a couple of weeks ago, my job has become one of like simply gauging whether Americans catch on to bullshit propaganda before a certain day, and that day is election day. And that's my job, and it sucks because that's what they've relegated pollsters to. But now, I think again, it's October 22nd, my friend. All right. I mean, when are they going to get this boost? Like you would have expected, given the dynamics of this race, that the excitement for her was fake and the support is falling. You would have expected it to be heavier in the beginning. And of course, we're going to see some increase, but I mean, the intensity is declining every day we put in the books. So it works against the campaign that's trying to come from behind. It just works against them. And eventually, more and more talk like this on shows like ours, or more and more talk like this on, you mentioned Mark Halpern show. A lot of people are watching that show. More and more talk like this on the Sunday shows, which just really ripped into her this weekend. I think this weekend you're going to start to hear people on the Democratic side make a desperate plea. You're going to start hearing desperation. If you don't vote, Donald Trump's going to like kill you or something. Like there will be absurd hyperbolic statements this weekend. And then after that, you're going to start to hear things like you have to save the House. You got to vote to save seats in the House. You got to vote to save because if Trump gets 55 seats or more in the Senate, he's going to steamroll over us and deport your families from 3 generations back. Like you're going to hear ridiculous comments like that. That's where we're at in this campaign. And that's not a winning campaign, right? Like you and I have been around a while, man. everything they're doing and saying, the leaks to the media, right, from down ballot candidates trying to wake them up, right, the finger pointing, right, all of this stuff that we're hearing and seeing. Harris herself going on friendly programs and saying he won't even sit down in 60 minutes and have an interview. These are the machinations of a loser. A loser. Every loser has done these things. Every loser has acted in this way. By the way, that includes parts of Trump's team in 2020, leaking to the press, finger pointing about, maybe if Brad wasn't, maybe if we didn't have a nutcase running the president's data team for 2 years, we'd be in a better spot. Like, that stuff all happened, and there was finger pointing already. And that, by the way, the finger pointing started weeks ago. Did it not? It started like 2 weeks ago. So
absolutely.
all of this really works against driving turnout up, is I guess like overall the point I'm trying to make. You're depressing the shit out of people doing this stuff, you know?
Agreed. So my, if I was the odds maker, I would set total presidential ballots at 149 million.
Yeah.
I think that you'll probably only get confirmation
higher
of this
than that, but
then that's fair. If you get the exit poll data is unreliable, but I think what the census data will be mostly close to this. White vote around 70 to 71% of the total vote. Yeah. Black vote around 11 to 12. Hispanic around 11 to 12. Asian, in the same 4 to 5 kind of category with the other vote. Here's where I have the popular vote, where I would put the median if I was putting up the odds on the betting markets. Trump, 75 million, same as 2020. Though it will have a different constituency within that 75.
You got the 2-to-1 flippers. You have the 2-to-1 flippers. This is what people have to understand. Even if turnout declines, he's winning so much of the Biden vote that he could remain at his vote share from total raw votes from 2020. Like, when you're
winning, the new voter
2-3 to
for
1,
the first time ever is going to trend Trump.
That's right.
The person who skipped 2020,
we know
2016 is going to vote more for Trump than Harris. So I have Harris. I would put her total at 72.5 million. Is where I have. So I have her losing about 8 to 9 million off of Biden's vote. Some of that is from turnout. Some of that is, as you note, Biden flipping. And some of that is underperforming with new voters. And I think the third party vote is dropping off a cliff. I think it's only going to be around 2 million, 1.5 to 2 million. So I have Trump, same percentages I did way back, just the other vote is down. Trump 50, Harris 48, other third party 1 to 2.
So you think he's going to hit 50, or you think it's going to be like 49.8, or like,
I would put because of the other vote. Whether he hits 50 is very much what happens with third party votes.
Yeah.
So and some of it is a function of turnout. These low propensity Democratic voters, they do turn out at the end. Some of them may disproportionately vote other or third party.
Yeah.
That's what's going to happen by them leaving Kennedy on the ballot in some states. The only people who are going to vote Kennedy are people that would never vote Trump. That was a mistake by the Democratic Party. I mean, we talked about it at the time, but now you're already starting to see it in the voter data, the polling data. So Trump with about a 2.5 million, 3 million popular vote victory. First time he'd ever win the popular vote. And my total electoral vote. Before we get on that, what do you think about that? So basically 50-48 to 2 or thereabouts.
Yeah, I think he's probably gonna. I mean, it does really depend on the third party vote, but round it up to 50, I can definitely see, which I cannot believe I'm saying this. But again, another thing I'm looking at, Robert, is that the guy has never polled over 45.7 or something. So he's and the polls between 16 and 20 have understated him by about 2.7 nationally. So, I mean, if anything in that ballpark would happen again, then you're looking at Trump ballpark around 50% of the vote. And again, depends on the third party, but let's say that, it's like 1%, right? Then you're looking at Harris at let's say 49.8 to 49 flat, or 48.7 or something like that. That's how I see a situation where Trump wins the popular vote. But honestly, it could be more, where Trump ends up with 50.5, 50.4, and she ends up with 48.5 or something like that. That absolutely is possible, because there are areas, you brought up California before, There was a recent poll showing her getting some of that base back, but she's nowhere near where Biden didn't do as well as Clinton, but she's nowhere near even where Biden was. Why is that? We are the groups we talked about. He's going to win the Central Valley counties. He is. So, you're going to have these little pockets, but the real big blow is going to come if he really does perform in these urban areas the way it suggests. So, let's say he does, like the Siena College poll is showing, almost 10 points, roughly 10 points better in the 5 boroughs, but it's not enough to carry the state. It's just enough to make it tighter. There are millions of votes in the 5 boroughs, folks. Another 10% is a huge change. Hillary Clinton's entire 2-point margin could be chalked up to the 5 boroughs and Los Angeles County. And that's it. That's it. I mean, if he really does put a significant dent, and by the way, we're not the only one showing him doing better in other places, urban areas like Wayne, right? I mean, I checked. I doubled, tripled, quadruple checked, did it live. He was at 27% of the vote in Wayne County in our 2020 polling. That's it. He got about 30%. If he does that, move to the east, Allegheny, and he ends up not at 39, but at 42 and a half, 43% outside of Pittsburgh, right? Robert, the county in general, not just outside of Pittsburgh, but the county in general. This stuff adds up. So it really all of a sudden does become extremely plausible. Add to that an extremely dominating performance in Florida where there are 14 million registered voters. I mean, this stuff is going to add up. Which brings, I meant to ask you, think Florida's going to vote to the right of Texas? I think that absolutely is a possibility this time. I do. More than a possibility. I am actually starting to believe it's likely.
Yeah, shifting to the electoral votes.
Haven't polled Texas in a while, but
on this map, the main difference I would have is I would move Maine, New Hampshire, Minnesota, and Nebraska 2 into undecided. I would put them in that yellow swing category.
Maine, Minnesota, New Hampshire, and Nebraska 2. And what am I missing? Virginia stays with Harris, right? Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Because what I have elsewhere, Vermont, Harris by 31. There, don't use 20. If you're betting on the margin markets, don't use 2016. Or if you do use 2016, add the write-in vote. There was a bunch of protester Bernie Sanders votes in 2016.
Yeah, that's not there
that shrunk that margin. But Harris by 31 in Vermont, by 26 in Massachusetts, by 13 in Rhode Island, by 12 in Connecticut. I'll come back to the swing states in a minute. Mid-Atlantic, New York, I have Harris by 15. New Jersey, Harris by less than 10. Harris by 9.
Yeah, that's plausible. Very, very, very plausible.
Maryland, Harris by 25. Delaware, Harris by 9, because some of the Biden machine will make sure she underperforms there. D.C., Harris by 87.
Yeah, man, I don't know, man. He's going to end up with
just 3-4% in the District of Corruption. Now, going to the first sort of Mid-Atlantic / Midwest swing state, Pennsylvania, I have Trump by 4. I have this not being that close, not within the swing state category. So, lean or likely red, depending on how you use those metrics. The Ohio, Trump by 11.
Yeah.
Michigan, Trump by 3. So I still have it slightly more Democratic than Pennsylvania, but I could see.
I just don't.
There's more Yankee ancestry in Michigan. There's more Jewish. Well, there's to some degree more Jewish, but there's definitely more Arab Muslim vote in Michigan.
There's no Appalachian counties. Like 54 counties in Pennsylvania are Appalachian counties, folks.
Oh, correct. Yeah. So Pennsylvania naturally is more Trump territory.
Yeah.
And the other reason why I think it will still be a little more Republican, Scranton Joe ran up the numbers. His biggest improvement in Pennsylvania was in Eastern Pennsylvania. He didn't budge much of Central and Western Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
Harris is going to return to Hillary's norms and throughout the state, especially in Eastern Pennsylvania. There's been in the registration data, early voting data, polling data, no matter what metric you use, look at comparable demographics. So the Scranton area is going to swing back to Trump even more than it was in 2016. The Philly suburbs, Harris will be able to hold probably the similar margins as what Biden got, but will underperform in Philly proper, underperform in Lancaster because of the Amish vote, and so net in parts of Bucks County she'll underperform.
Yeah, and Berks too.
The working class exurban parts that are there, the semi-rural parts that are there. So I think net she'll be slightly down in the Philly market overall from Biden, but she'll be way down in the Scranton area. That's where you'll see the biggest shift within the state. The Wisconsin Trump +4. It's just trending. There's too many constituent components of that state trending towards Trump. You look
And
at
we're talking about who's not voting, Robert. It's like,
yes,
oh my God, the
you have
Dane
places
County
like
vote.
Milwaukee. Well,
Yeah.
but big parts of Madison. The student population is not as engaged at all as it was in
They don't like
2020.
her. They don't like her.
The younger
For real.
exactly. So they're going to underachieve. It's already happening in some of the metrics that are currently available in the state. And northern states, Fox River Valley, the Norwegian areas of the West, and even some of those suburbs that uniquely swung in parts of Waukesha County are not doing that this time. So the net effect is, again, it's also not going to be close, in my opinion. The Iowa, I have Trump +12. That number could go up though, very easily up. Like,
what do you
Des
think
Moines was
Seltzer's
another
going to
area.
drop? What bullshit you think Seltzer's going to drop on us? She dropped that Trump +4 in September, and everyone had a panic shit fit over it, forgetting that she actually had Biden and Trump tied in September in 2020. I told you she was sitting on that poll, by the way. Everyone called me every name in the book. Like, folks, I don't say shit like that unless I'm like positive. All right. She held that number, and I don't know how she gets away with it because she's the great Ann Seltzer. That was so wrong. But let's say it's the 4-point shift that you and I have been talking about, bare minimum across the board. Well, she had their final was Trump +7 over Biden, right? Or 6 over Biden. So that leads us to believe she's probably going to pop out with like a Trump +8 to 11. That'll be her final,
I
right?
think she'll do a final with double digits to cover herself. Maybe be even Trump
Cover her
at
ass.
least Trump +9. So
Yeah.
it's something that looks like the final result to maintain her reputation as being
Yep.
the guru of Iowa.
Isn't that what she did
about
against
that.
Clinton? Isn't that what she did against Clinton? It was Trump +9, right? I believe. Hold on. Iowa 2016 RCP polls. All right. Trump versus Clinton. It was 7. It was only 7. So it was 7
And did
both
it
times.
finish Trump +8 in 2016?
In 2016, he
Or
won
maybe
the
Trump
state.
+9.
He won the state by 9.5. But
9.5. That was
her final poll was only Trump +7. I'm curious then. Maybe I'm
so
mixing up.
basically, I'm moving
timing.
into about 2.5 points, but I could see parts of Iowa, the way they're trending, going more in
7.
that
Yeah.
direction. But
Yeah, she did
if
7
I was
across
setting
the
the
board.
odds, that's where I would set it. Trump +12 and margin of victory in Iowa.
Yeah. Yeah.
Indiana, I have Trump +20.
Yeah.
Illinois, I think she's going to underperform there because of issues around Chicago and some of the trends in Southern Illinois mirroring parts of Iowa and Indiana. I have Harris by 15 in Indiana.
Well, there actually is a group.
By 15 in Illinois.
There actually are groups. Again, I mean, folks, these groups are working. I mean, there actually are groups trying to actively peel away black voters in Chicago. So, like, obviously, he's not going to win it. But let me just point out how many votes the guy got in Chicago in 2020, more than he got in 16. The reason why it wasn't much closer is because obviously Joe Biden and Democrats did what they did. It was a free for all for ballots. And by the way, I just want to tell the right, of course they're going to cheat. Like, stop bitching and moaning and do your job and get people to the polls. Like, if you want to win, like, of course they're going to cheat. But again, there's a point where you got to realize that there's like a huge fraudster industry of election fraud. They love to go on and on about this. And they act as if there's an infinite or number of ballots. That is not the case. There are a finite number of ballots, and nobody's bending over backwards. I mean, that's a big part of this too, Robert. Nobody's bending over backwards to help Harris stuff the ballot box. They're just not. I mean, it's going to happen, of course, but no one's willing to take a risk on her. Like, Shapiro is not going to the microphone like he did in 2020 to say, don't worry. It doesn't matter how many votes Republicans put up on election day. Allegheny County will find the votes for Vice President Biden. He said that publicly before the election. So, like, that's not the case this time. They're not doing that this time. Go ahead, though. Sorry.
Yeah. So, yeah, we can put Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin in the lean red category,
On
and
election
Ohio
day.
should be dark red, not lean red. The last Midwestern state in that category is Minnesota. I would have it as let's see where I have the final numbers. I have Harris by 2. So I would leave it as yellow because the key here, the Twin
Minnesota,
Cities,
you said, right? Minnesota, the Twin City
I would
bird.
leave it as yellow because I have it less than the margin of error of all polls. So the issue here is twofold. One, clearly rural Minnesota Trump will pick up even more votes like he did in 2020.
Yeah.
The youthful growth suburban areas around Minneapolis, just like nationwide, I think you'll see that revert back closer to 2016 norms than what happened in 2020. Then you have, I think the Iron Range will continue its trend, but accelerate it towards Trump. That was a region that Biden, as an old school, old Union Democrat, held better than I thought he would.
Yeah.
So when you add that up, and remember, you use 2016 as the barometer, that was a much closer election than 2020 in terms of within the it was basically almost the same as the national vote.
Yeah, 2 versus 7 points. Yeah,
exactly. It was a 5-point movement that was mostly about improvement by Biden in the Iron Range and the drastic improvement in the Twin Cities. Now, so that means can Harris replicate Biden's margins around the Twin Cities without that boost of unusual turnout amongst growth suburban youthful voters that happened in 2020. And so just that by itself would reduce her margin there. But here's where there's a big Somalian, Arab Muslim African Muslim population. These groups,
we're gonna see if the polls are really right, Robert, because let's say that who I keep forgetting who sponsors that YouGov poll. Arab News sponsors it. But it is a different Muslim population, as you state. It's actually an African Muslim population. It's not, the Somali, so it is different. So we'll see.
Absolutely. And then there's a Hmong population in the Twin Cities.
Yeah.
There's the Young Left that's very big within the Minneapolis region. So just taking away that suburban, growth vote amongst younger voters that happened in 2020 makes Minnesota closer to a 3-point margin already. And then further erosion in rural areas, further erosion in the Iron Range, where Harris is trending badly across the country among similar comparable constituencies, would mean that she's got to hold close to Biden's margins in the Twin Cities itself.
Yeah.
And there's reasons to doubt that amongst the black vote. There's reasons to doubt that due to voter participation. Though Minnesota does have a higher voter participation than other states.
Minnesota, they voted high rates.
They do, but not always the Prince vote out of Minneapolis. And so for those don't remember Prince, from Minneapolis. Then you got the Somali vote trend as well. And then you got the youthful progressive protest vote as well. So you throw that in, and even though Walz is at the top of the ticket, he doesn't have he's only been governor there for 6 years. So he doesn't have the same vice hold on a state that other Shapiro has, even in shorter time period in Pennsylvania. Just accidentally says things that hurts Harris in interviews.
Whitmer too, though, Robert. Whitmer too.
Exactly.
The both of them, neither one of them could answer the simple question, which is it's simple, but it's probably the biggest question of the cycle. What is going to make you different than Joe Biden? And both of them were like, can you tell us why a President Kamala Harris would be different than a President Joe Biden? And both of them were just like, I can't find a damn thing, because they want to be president and they don't want to run against an incumbent Harris in 2028, Robert. They want to run against Trump's heir apparent. That's the easier race to run. Come on. Give me a break.
Exactly. And so now let's move over to the South Atlantic states.
Oh, well, what were we doing with Maine and New Hampshire? We were leaving it for now?
Oh, okay. I'm going to come back to them at the very end.
Okay.
To the South Atlantic states, I have Harris by 3 in Virginia, so I would make Virginia yellow. That it's within the margin of error.
Okay, I was putting it lean.
Yeah, within margin of error public polling. That you have conflicting groups. You have Appalachia trending Trump. You have Northern Virginia being a likely Harris will hold most of the Biden vote there. So where that puts the key voter groups is Central and Virginia Beach, Central Virginia and Virginia Beach, places like Richmond area.
Yeah.
These were areas, again, where there was wherever you had youthful growth in a suburban urban environment in the country. And you had that in places that you might not think of, like Virginia Beach and Richmond, also showed unique Democratic trends that changed the 2016 to 2020 map. If we take that back away, we go back to the 2020 map, Virginia wasn't as out of whack with the national vote as it was in 2020. And now you have a huge immigration population in Virginia, big Asian American population in Virginia. They're generally trending towards Trump, but if you dig into the metrics, it's mostly working class Asians more than college educated Asians.
And let me just
So
point out that there were, I just counted. Shit, I'm forgetting. There were 5 polls conducted in the state of Virginia in the month of September. You know how many polls are on Real Clear Politics right now in the state of Virginia for the month of October? 0. 0 polls were actually fielded in the month of October. This happened in 2016, and then there was one. It showed Clinton up by, I think, 12 or 11, and it was too close to call until like 1:30 in the morning when they finally called it. Now, the only reason I'm saying the one thing is the early vote does look bad for Virginia for Democrats as well. It's old as hell. I mean, it's like last I checked, it was like 6%, 18 to 29. It does not look good. But they do have an get out the vote election day effort in Virginia. In Georgia, in some areas, in like Gwinnett County, they do, but like it's not as prevalent. In Virginia, they can get voters to the polls on election day. And as old, what's his name? The late great Bob Beckel said, or is Bob he passed, didn't he, Bob Beckel? He
I
did.
think so, yeah.
Yeah. As he pointed out in 2014, to everyone's dismay on Fox News, they will just fill in what many ballots as they need to in the Fairfax area. And for those who don't know what we're talking about, Bob Beckel was like high on pain medication, and he was on the 5 and back then. So they put him on the election day panel, and when Ed Gillespie was running very strong against Warner, they were separated by a couple thousand votes. That was a race, by the way. The Democrat was also supposed to win, according to the Washington Post, by 13 points. All right. It was not. It was very close. And Bob Beckel admitted on live television that Democrats fill out ballots on election day in Fairfax County to put them over the edge. He admitted it. Don't take that shit to me, Washington Post and New York Times. Take that shit to your own Democratic cohorts, because they're the ones who blabbed it for everyone who was listening. Classic moment in cable news.
And the other factor here, so I think Virginia Beach and Richmond will go be closer to 2016 numbers than 2020.
Yeah.
I think Appalachia will continue to surge in its turnout and Trump trend. I think Northern Virginia will hold steady, but they've sort of tapped out most of the votes they can get out of Northern Virginia. So it will come down to black turnout in Virginia. And right now that looks bad. And that's what could actually flip the state towards Trump. North Carolina, you can put that as red.
What the hell are we doing here? As if
Harris and the Democrats are wasting their money in North Carolina. That this is not going to be a close state. I get that even Trump's own campaign has trouble polling the state, so they spend a lot of time, money, and resources there because Harris and the Democrats do. But this is not close. This is not going to be competitive. You look at the voter registration data. You look at the early voting data. You look at the historical groups. You look at the underlying demographics. It's just especially as you pointed out. Substantial parts of Eastern North Carolina, given who's retired there over the last several presidential cycles, are a Republican-leaning group. And it more than counteract what you get out of the Research Triangle in Charlotte.
Watch the 30-point edge. Watch the 30-point win in Morehead City. Watch this. Affluent, by the way, educated. These are like voters, white voters in polos. Watch him win there by over 30 points. I guarantee it. Guarantee.
And you're going to have the worst.
Watch that happen. It's going to happen.
You're going to have the worst black relative to white voter turnout in that state than you've seen since pre-Obama.
And I think he's going to win too, like 15 to 20% of the black vote in areas like Craven and north of that in Hyde, like where there are chunks of rural black and suburban black voters. I'm telling you right now, I don't want to blow him up, but like I know personally, he is like the personification of what we're talking about. He is 40 years old. He voted for Biden, as did his wife in 2020. He always kind of liked Trump, but he just wanted to change. It was like a little too crazy for him. They both can't stand Joe Biden or Kamala Harris now. And let me just put it this way. They also got one of these today. All right. So like they're going to vote for Donald Trump. They are textbook what I'm talking about. Why? Well, look, his wife's profession, is perfect. When you increase the cost of milk and eggs the way you do, you're directly hurting people on their bottom line. Like, specifically told me that what she would charge for certain goods under the Trump administration is how much she has to pay to make it now. So think about that. She used to charge for a product. I don't want to blow her up personally here, but her product, she would charge the same amount that it now costs her to make it under Trump. So that's how badly it's hurting her. It's hurting the family and the bottom line. And he is supposed to be looking forward to retirement. His 20's almost done. It basically is done. He's sitting around just waiting for it, Robert. So she's going to do her thing on the side while he gets his check he earned after 20 years. People know what I'm talking about. He's a 20-year man. All right. And if you're a 20-year man, you know what I mean. You know what he is. All right. But he was not a staunch Trump supporter. He kind of liked him, liked the economy, but definitely wanted a change in 20. He is that voter. Only he also happens to be obviously the whole family is, and they also happen to be black. And I'm telling you, that is exactly the kind of voter that we talk to every day. And that is going to put Trump somewhere in the neighborhood of 15, maybe even 20%. And this part of the state that we're discussing was undercounted by the census. Everyone knows it. From Raleigh to Durham, everyone knows it. And yet, some reason, pollsters like Baris and others continuously start with their weights from the census perspective. Like, if you do that, you will be wrong in North Carolina. That's going to happen. The triangle is not enough. And by the way, in the modern Trump era, with the exception of 16, in the Trump era, North Carolina is consistently polled to the left of Georgia, but voted to the right. So if he's about to take Georgia by 4 or 5, guys, North Carolina is your polling problem. It's not the actual state of the race. Sorry.
Precisely. And I think there'll be a youthful turnout decline in the Research Triangle region. The South Carolina, Trump plus 16. I remember some people were pretending it was going to be close at times in 2020, which was funny.
Remember this? You remember this one? Look at Morning Consult. The genius is still polling now. Look, guys, they actually projected that this would be a somewhat close race. Biden was approaching the margin of error here. I kid you not. Look at it. And then obviously Trump went on to win it by 12 points. I mean, it's going to be 16, 15 points this time around. I agree with Robert. I think this is gone. You're going to look at just huge margins in Piedmont areas. You're going to look at the, what do they call? It's the tribal area, which has been trending more Democratic. That's over. You could see it in the primary vote. I mean, he just got massive, massive margins when Haley was running against him in that area. And those are people that were kind of flirting with the idea of going back to the Democratic Party that precisely have been turned off by the last 4 years. So that state will not be close. But expect the Morning Consult Trump plus 5 any day now. Man, that's the shittiest poll out there. It's got to be one of, if not the shittiest polls out there. It may actually be the worst poll, Robert, because look at 22. They are one of only 2 polls to have Democrats ahead on the generic ballot. And the other one's NBC, yet they're the only ones still showing Harris with an advantage in this race. The other one, NBC, now has a tied race nationally. So not even NBC is staying in the company of Morning Consult. They're awful. They're a joke. Every time I bring up the Morning Consult poll to appear, whether they're on the left or right, there's a laugh, a chuckle. Nobody respects them.
Agree. And moving on to Georgia. Georgia can be light red, not even pink. It's going to be Trump by 5 or more in Georgia. This was a place
that actually puts it there with North Carolina. It does.
This was the peak place where both very loose liberal mail-in voting rules maximized turnout. They sent ballots out to everybody in the whole state. Didn't do any meaningful signature match checks. Ruled that out. There was all kinds of questionable ballots all over the place. You can go back.
Remember the all cap signatures? You remember that?
Exactly. Some insane stuff. This is where 2000 Mules mostly based their film based on what happened in Atlanta. There was unusual turnout tendencies all across the suburbs. It was also the peak area. You saw 15, 16, 18-point movements above what you saw in comparable areas across the country.
He's not going to allow that this time. He can't.
Yeah, exactly. One, there isn't any the cultural zeitgeist. The reason why that happened electorally is not going to replicate. It's not showing up in any of the data, any of the voter registration data, any of the early voting data, any of the polling data. So you just normalize that and you put it in the current national environment, and Georgia's not a competitive state.
No, it's really not at this
point. Florida, Trump plus 11.
Yeah, what is this?
Going to exceed even the Trump plus 8 margin.
That dude, that goes dark red.
I agree. And here's people forget, as to what happened in 2020 in part. Northern Florida didn't move a lot. Rural populous areas like Dixie County trended towards Trump, but large parts of the Gulf Coast didn't budge much from 2016. Much of Northern Florida didn't budge. Much of Tampa didn't budge. Jacksonville actually trended Democratic. It's now back trending Republican. And by the way, if you follow the Duval early vote, the Duval vote, it will mirror off the Georgia vote.
Yeah.
And if you do that, you're going to see it. Duval will start to be +3, +4. Then my guess it'll be +5 predictive by the end of an early voting process. Yeah. The big swing in Florida as to why it no longer became a competitive state in 2020 was because of Puerto Rican shift in Central Florida and younger Cuban and Venezuelan and Colombian vote in South Florida. Yeah. While older Cubans had always been a reliable Republican constituency, they had swung toward younger Cubans had swung towards the Democrats under Obama.
Yeah.
And then
he was pathetic with those voters. He split the Cuban vote basically in 2012.
Completely. I mean, and they convinced a lot of them in 2016 that Trump wanted to redeport them. So that younger Cuban votes. A lot of the Cuban congressmen opposed Trump. The Republican, so-called Republican, Diaz-Balart and that crowd, whose sister was married to Fidel Castro.
Learned his lesson, didn't he?
Yes, he did learn that lesson. But now the COVID changed their politics. They didn't like it at all. They saw the signs of fascistic government, didn't want to be any part of it. DeSantis's high-profile resistance on that may help facilitate and accelerate their swing, like their Mexican-American brethren and their Puerto Rican brethren in the central part of the state. It's the reason why Osceola County was one of the biggest swing counties towards Trump in 2020 was because of the big Puerto Rican vote that's present there. And that Puerto Rican vote showed up in parts of New York and other places too. So you look at the Puerto Rican vote, that vote continues to trend Trump. As you pointed out, Miami-Dade's going to vote Trump. That was the only basis that Democrats could ever compete in that state. And now Jacksonville's back to swinging in its Republican direction. This state is nowhere close. It's no longer a swing state at all.
Miami's going to Trump, guys. That's it. I hate to tell everybody, burst people's bubbles. I know a lot of people thought that this would end up, Robert, just being like a gubernatorial phenomena. Just to give everybody an idea right now, in Miami, where are you? Democrats' early vote have less than a 20,000 vote edge on early vote that's by mail that has been returned. But when you include in-person early voting, Republicans are now beginning to chip away. And then remember, there are a lot of Venezuelans and Cubans that are actually registered as independents, but they will vote heavily for Donald Trump. So, I mean, in our polling right now, Robert, it's like anywhere between a Trump +2 to Trump. I mean, he could win it by upwards of 4 or 5. I think it'll be close, but he's going to win Miami. If it's not, if it's like Trump +6 or something, then forget about it. I mean, it's move on to the next state. If we see that immediately, because Florida will come in relatively early, and that's what's cool about Florida. We'll get the blue vote first. Right. And if we already think that that's going to come back kind of like a more moderate or tempered version of what we saw in 22. If it does, I don't know what the hell took so long to call that state for Rubio and DeSantis in 22. That was ridiculous. The so-called, the AP and even decision desk was really slow to the roll. But we'll know immediately whether or not there's this like real movement to Trump among these groups, like as we have been seeing in the polling. And then that's just going to bode very badly. I mean, this idea that shifts in Florida aren't predictive, still, I mean, I understand it is a different animal, but I kind of feel like Florida is like 4-6 years ahead of some of these other states. And if Democrats don't figure out how to stop this and keep just like the wokeism towards the white educated liberal, if they don't do that, then they're going to see the Florida syndrome in a lot of other states. I mean, the only thing that could save them is how stupid Republicans are. Really. I mean, it's the only thing to rival it. Damn, it's 4:20 already. I'm like wondering what everyone's yelling at me for. All right, go ahead, brother. Keep going.
Yeah. I'll swing through these. Border states. West Virginia will compete with Wyoming for the most Trump state. Trump +45. This is old
for sure.
Jacksonian America. It used to be the heart of the Democratic Party, dated back to 1828. And now it's going to vote massively towards Trump. Big, one of the most populous areas of the country. Kentucky, Trump +36. Tennessee, Trump +28. Missouri, Trump +21. Expect Hawley's numbers to be much higher than the polls are currently predicting. It's not going to be within 10
Here we go again.
The Deep South, similar trends. Alabama, Trump +31. Mississippi, Trump +21. Louisiana, Trump +25. Arkansas, Trump
Yeah.
plus 30. That was one state that trended towards Trump in 2020 as well. Now we get into cowboy country. Get over to Oklahoma, Trump plus 30. There was a poll that suggested that Oklahoma would be competitive this year. That pollster should disappear.
They should just go away. Yeah.
And to
This
your
is
point, I have Texas right at where I have Florida. So I think it's deep red, not light red. I have Trump plus 11 in Texas. I think those Dallas and Austin suburbs that had that youthful phenomenon of 2020, I think that's going to regress to its mean. If you
very
look at underlying
possible.
data,
Very
a lot of
possible.
that growth has disappeared from those regions, right? You look at Airbnbs and housing market bubbles and all the rest. In fact, people got priced out of the market. The Airbnb has been a debacle in both the Dallas and Austin markets. Austin's been seeing a major decline in its real estate valuation over the last 2 years. A lot of issues there that were not there in 2020 that are going to regress back to the 2016 mean. Mexican Americans continue to trend towards Trump. East Texas and the old pot and the Western oil country continue to trend towards Trump. And then the same urban voter tendencies of either better Trump performance or lower Democratic turnout amongst black voters in places like Houston and Dallas are going to further accelerate the broader trend in the state to where Texas, too, is now back to being a deep red state, not a light red.
If he wins Texas by more than 6, Robert, the odds of him winning the popular vote just skyrocket. Because, I mean, it's possible it's like isolated, but if he wins Florida by the margins, it looks like he's going to win it by. And then he wins Texas by more than 6. He's already on the verge of tightening the popular vote to a net, to an even, close to an even race. And then, as we all expect, everyone is generally expecting, if he holds on to the rest of the Sun Belt and then does nearly, if not run through, as the map shows, in the Great Lakes states, the northern Midwest, and the Mid-Atlantic, he puts up a better performance. It's just the odds of him winning the popular vote go through the roof. I mean, she cannot use at that point, like the 5 boroughs in LA to carry the day. She can. There's just too. I mean, he won Florida by 1.2, 1.4, I believe, in 2016. The net vote shift in Florida alone is just outside. You're talking about a difference of several 100,000 votes in Florida alone. He made up like 200,000 from 16 to 20, and he won it by 3.4. So that's like a overall, basically a 2-point shift to Trump, from 16 to 20. If you're now talking about a near 7-point shift to the man in the state of Florida, where there are 14 million votes, and then he wins Texas by more than 6, which is what he has been winning Texas by. I just don't know how she holds it back. I mean, that's far worse than Hillary Clinton performed, and she only won the popular vote by a little over 2. It's just the math gets so hard. Where else can she make it up, Robert? Where else can she make it up?
Correct. I mean, the big difference is, if people want to know why do I have a bigger shift in Florida and Texas from 2016, it's the Hispanic vote.
Hispanic vote. Yeah.
Massive Mexican. You're talking about 30, 40-point movements in margin throughout Southwest Texas. And now he's adding to that. And then the few areas that were regressing Trump's improvement, such as suburban Dallas and suburban Austin.
Yeah, you're going to see modest improvements in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Modest improvements because of he's doing better with educated Anglos, as they call them in Texas.
So a lot of that youth vote that was part of that cultural pandemic phenomenon, stay at home, participate in the election. That's just not here in 2024 is what my prediction is. Now we get into prairie country. Trump plus 22 in Kansas. Trump plus 27 in Nebraska. Anybody that thinks that the Republican Senate seats are up for grabs are not paying attention.
But Decision Desk actually comments on that up here. They basically say, we hear it. It's not at all likely. There are no targeted Democratic flips. There are none. So,
and I have Nebraska too, returning more to like 2016, even despite the population changes within the district, because they're another one of those places around Omaha. These youthful growth suburban areas that had an unusual phenomenon in 2020 that has not shown the ability to stay consistent in 2024. And that's why I have it. Ultimately, I think Trump may steal it. Trump win by 1, something like that. But I have it basically right within the margin of error in that. Okay, I don't think it's going to be Harris plus 4, Harris plus 5, Harris plus 6, like some of the polls are forecasting.
Yeah.
Similar as we get up to the Dakotas, North Dakota, Trump plus 40. South Dakota, Trump plus 33. Montana, Trump plus 23. That's why Tester was dead this cycle.
He's done.
Wyoming probably will still be the most Trumpy state, Trump plus 48, but West Virginia might give them a run for their money. Now you get Idaho, Trump plus 36, Utah, Trump plus 25. Mormons are coming back home to the Trump camp. And then last but not least is Colorado. I have Colorado as light blue rather than dark blue. Now it is a mass mail-in voting state, but I have Harris plus 5.
It's so educated and young. It's like too educated and young for me. But I could see them throwing it away. Like they're
I think the rural
out
areas
over Stein.
The rural areas, the Hispanic areas will trend Trump. And then I just don't think some of that suburban phenomenon that we saw elsewhere, these growth suburbs around Denver were like growth suburbs around Atlanta. They had this massive Democratic trend between 2016 and 2020. I think that will regress more to the 2016 norm. And that's how you get a state that Harris is very likely to win, but not by such a safe, easy margin that they can't sweat it at all.
What do you think about what do you think about New Mexico? A lot of talk about New Mexico. I mean, it's just, to me, it's basic arithmetic. In 2016, Trump won the white vote, but he lost the Hispanic vote by a traditional margin, even though he did better than he did with Hispanics nationwide. And then, fast forward to 2020, he declined among white voters and did fairly decent among Hispanics, again surpassing his national support with Hispanics. So, like, if white voters move back to more of a 2016 margin, and he really is doing this well with Hispanics, there's no reason to believe, because it's so much more non-college folks than some of these other states, like even Colorado, right? The Hispanic vote in New Mexico is like a demographically Trumpy-friendly vote because it is so non-college. So if he passed his prologue and he again, does better with Hispanics in New Mexico than he does among all Hispanics nationwide, there's like no way for the state not to be close. They're 40% of the vote, so if he wins whites like he did against Hillary, which wasn't huge, but he still won them. And then he, let's say he ties with or loses Hispanics by 5. What did you have it at 15, right? Nationally. So let's say he does lose Hispanics, but I lose by 5 to 8. Man, that's really close. That's a close race. That's like 3 points, I mean, that's within 3.
Yeah, real briefly before I get to the Sun Belt, West Coast.
I would make light blue.
Yeah. Washington, Harris by 14. California, Harris by 25. Oregon, Harris by 8. Alaska, Trump by 15. Don't listen to polls suggesting it's close there. Hawaii, Harris by like 22. I think she's going to badly underperform in Hawaii. It's been trending in a different direction. There's still unhappiness about what happened in Maui. There's been a range of surveys that have suggested, relative to Democratic norms there, underachievement, underperformance.
I think I might have said before that it was California and New Jersey. It was actually Hawaii too. Did move to Trump from 16 to 20. It did. Yeah.
And sorry, now
not Hawaii. I forgot Hawaii.
Are accelerating. It's a similar sort of working class Asian pattern. By the way, there's a substantial Hawaiian population in Las Vegas,
Islander,
around Nevada. So that that's where there's correlation sometimes between looking at these voter groups. So that leaves the Sun Belt and the Northeast. So on New Mexico, I would shift New Mexico to yellow. I have Harris by 3. I think it's within the margin of error of public opinion polling. There's just too much Mexican American vote trending.
Too much.
In
40%. It's the Hispanic vote could be 41 and 42%. And it's the math, brother. It's not Colorado where it's 17% and then it's very educated whites. Yes, there are educated whites in Santa Fe and Albuquerque, but there's also a very rural non-college vote. That's what obviously helped him. He did better too, again, with college voters in 2016 than the polling suggested he would in New Mexico. Yeah, they said he was going to get blown out. Now, third parties were on the ballot there, and that certainly helped Gary Johnson, the former governor. It was different. But I just think that the bottom line is, if you look, guys, Biden's entire margin in New Mexico was fueled by him winning Hispanics by a more traditional margin, though less than he did nationally. Well, he tied Trump with whites. Hillary lost them, but he tied Trump with whites. Nobody is suggesting that Harris is going to do better with whites overall than Biden did. If they are, they're doing it using the Harry Enton twist, apples to oranges comparison that we warned you about. That's bullshit. Does anyone expect her to do better among whites than Scranton Joe? Give me a break. I mean, anyone's welcome on the program to try to argue it. I mean, I'd love to have somebody on to do that because you'll get melted and you know it. The only way you can do it is by making the apples to orange comparison. I mean, I think we all expect he's going to do a little bit better with non-college voters and marginally better with college voters. If that's the case, he wins white something like 51-48, ballpark. And then it's up to Hispanics to close that margin for her and overtake it. And that's if she can't, and that doesn't happen, then you're all in for a real surprise. I'm serious.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that there'll be some loss of oil country by Harris, from where Biden got votes to Trump in that southern part of New Mexico. Some loss of some cowboy votes in eastern New Mexico, and not the same youthful suburban spike that occurred outside Albuquerque that happened in other places across the country to the same degree. So then you have Nevada and Arizona. I would make Arizona not pink, but more red. I think Arizona is going to be Trump +6. The polling data is trending that way. The early voting data is overwhelmingly in that direction. Registration voter data is in that direction. The similar Phoenix suburban phenomenon that I don't see replicating. You continue to see the Mexican-American vote trend Trump. You continue to see Mormon votes come back home. I don't think Arizona is going to be within the margin of fraud or anything close to it. In Nevada, I have Trump +3. So or +3 to 4. So I would make it.
Well, then you can make it light pink.
And
that puts him at 312, which is interesting. And that's without doing the other states. Why is that interesting? Because if you look at the simulations that are run on Decision Desk and now several other models, you will see that the highest likelihood in the event of a Trump victory, and I've been saying this for months now to people, is 312. Now, could it possibly not end up there? Of course. But in the event of a Trump victory, the highest likelihood in their simulations too is 312. Why is that? Historical voting patterns and trends. When the race breaks for someone, especially in the modern era, and the 4-cycle rolling average is more important. We're not in 04 anymore. It's not that's country anymore. If Pennsylvania breaks to Trump or Michigan breaks to Trump, the Great Lakes will break to Trump. If Nevada and or one or the other in Arizona or vice versa breaks to Trump, the other one will move to Trump. That's the most and of course, if there's movement, the most likely outcome is that candidate will win that state, which will make, by the way, if Trump carries both Arizona and Nevada, New Mexico will be close. It will be closer. Let me put it that way. It will be closer. And the same thing goes for like if Duval County moves back to Trump, then Georgia's going to be out of reach for her. Not close, out of reach, like the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Because you're going to see him doing better in counties that surround Savannah than he did in 2020. I mean, it's just similar demographics. So when they run these simulations, obviously it's incorporating this stuff. So, that the most likely outcome on DDHQ is, in fact, in the event of a Trump win, is 312.
Exactly.
And by the way,
the reason for those people that
same thing goes for Harris win, by the way.
The why Arizona trended the way it did in 2020, 2 reasons. One, it had that youthful growth Phoenix suburban phenomenon that had this huge spike in turnout and huge spike voting Democratic. Now, some of that are questionable ballots, as was litigated in 2020. But putting that aside, I just don't see evidence that that's going to repeat and replicate 2024. So that's part of why I see it back to the 2016 norm. The second aspect is Mexican-American voters in Arizona, Nevada, and California did not trend as heavily towards Trump as they did in Florida and Texas in Hispanics.
And again,
almost the same Media University polling data. In fact, Media University polling had them not changing at all. It missed that vote in Arizona, Nevada, and in California in 2020, shifting toward Trump. But now they're all catching it, and they're seeing major movement that you're going to see Mexican-American voters in Arizona, Nevada, and Eastern California, and Eastern and Central California, and East LA voting more like, trending more like Mexican-American voters in Texas. And if that happens through New Mexico, that's how you get these states that have been, everybody thinks it's going to be right down to the wire. And I think the closest states in the country are going to be Maine and New Hampshire, Minnesota, New Mexico, and Virginia, rather than Nevada, Arizona, Georgia, North Carolina, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, like people think. Now, in the end, I would, as you pointed out, as a spread basis, I would make the odds maker. I would say Trump 312 electoral votes is where I would put the 50-50 breakthrough. I personally have Trump winning 319 electoral votes, same as July, because I think some combination of these states he's going to pick off. I have it as most likely he picks off Maine, New Hampshire,
Like
and
Biden picked
Nebraska
off
too.
Georgia, by the way, and Biden picked off Arizona, and you can say it's from cheating and whatnot and irregularities. Again, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Those areas broke to Biden, and then he plucked off a couple of states in 2016. Trump, the areas broke to him. He plucked off some of these states in multiple on multiple platforms. I see some comments, some variation of the comment like, yeah, but maybe he'll win Wisconsin or he'll win Pennsylvania, but he doesn't get the other two. Folks, that has not happened since 1988. And some of these elections have been very close. George Bush came very close to winning Wisconsin. In 2004, he came close to winning Pennsylvania. But at the end of the day, they all voted with Kerry and they all voted with Gore. In 2016, Clinton came very close to holding Michigan, 10,000 votes, but it didn't matter. At the end of the day, they all went to Donald Trump. In 2020, I mean, we have to go through Wisconsin, how close that was. Biden came very close to losing Wisconsin, and Trump near plucked it off. By the way, Pennsylvania wasn't that big of a margin either. Michigan was the bigger margin at 2.5 points, but it didn't matter. And at the end of the day, they all three went to Biden. Before 88, you got to go back even further to when there's like a hometown candidate or a hometown regional candidate. They vote very much in line with each other because the demographics, while they all have their own interesting combination, are similar enough that when a candidate does that well with Catholics, does that well with Norwegians, does that well with Germans, which, by the way, I just named 3 very important groups for the Great Lake regions in the Mid-Atlantic of Pennsylvania. Trump is winning all 3 of them. So it's very difficult for Harris to pull together. Hillary Clinton lost the Catholic vote by a smaller margin than Trump is winning it against Harris right now, according to Pew Research, not Big Data Poll, Pew Research. In Pennsylvania, Joe Biden, he won back the Catholic vote by most estimates, low single digits, 1 to 3 points, and he won all 3 of the Great Lakes states, where they still are 25 to 30% of the electorate. So if Trump is winning the Catholic vote, of course he's winning the evangelical vote. He's going to win it over Harris by an even bigger margin probably than he won it over Biden, despite what you may hear. I mean, guys, are they going to vote for a far left Hindu woman? They're not. Give me a break, all right? Give me a freaking break. Artifacts and problems with polling do not reflect reality, all right? He's going to win them by a huge margin. It's going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 80-20 for crying out loud, or close to it. And then he's winning Catholics if he does that. It's like, good luck. Good luck. Because you're not getting this outpouring of Arab Americans in the Detroit or Flint or any of these areas. You know, you can rely on the white liberal of Waukesha. That's what you got going for you. That's really what it comes down to. It's very,
and no doubt. I got to hop and catch a plane, but
yeah. It's 4:39.
I'll give one component. So the earlier free bet gave out here. First free bet was for Trump to win the election when he was an underdog. Second free bet was for Benny Marino when he was an underdog to win the Ohio Senate seat. I'll give you a third free bet, even though it's late in the process, in the election odds markets. You can still get it at plus money in some places, 2-1, 3-1, 4-1 even. You know, shop around. It's for Trump to win the popular vote. You can now, that's my third free bet here on the show. If you want all the betting predictions by state, by margin, by which ones have the best odds, which ones should you apportion your bankroll towards, you can go to sportspicks.locals.com. They're all posted in a spreadsheet. You can go all the way through at the top of the board with all the official picks, which include sports picks and others for the weekend. And remember, everybody, continue to support the Public Polling Project so we can continue to get accurate data that some of us can make money off of, but the rest of us can at least have accurate information for what happened in the election.
They're doing great with that too. All the best, Robert. Sportspicks.locals.com for Barnes. Look, Wednesday is tomorrow. Inside the Numbers at noon. I'm going to go over this very same map. We'll talk about a little bit more of how these states break at the end and these groups. Yeah, I'm look, I'm a little bit more, and again, I don't want to give it all away for tomorrow. I'm still a little bit more skeptical on the popular vote. I'm just there now where it absolutely is possible that he can and will win the popular vote. The states, however, again, never seen Florida look like this, folks. The Great Lakes states, never seen this. We haven't polled Georgia. We did poll Nevada a couple of weeks ago. I wish I could have shared it with you. I was allowed to share the results with you and some of the stuff internally. But I do believe we were the only ones at that time. Maybe not. Maybe not. Trump may have still been ahead in Nevada. I don't know. It's been a bit, but the bottom line is this Clark County is just not what it used to be for Democrats. I mean, we'll see if it ramps up, but as of right now, the idea that the election will be decided pretty much, we'll all know, is absolutely acknowledged by everybody at this point. All right. Overperformance by Republicans everywhere they need to, underperformance by Democrats everywhere they can't. And it comes down to the problems they've had with these groups that we have been talking about for the better part of a year and a half now. All right. The switcheroo ballooned it for a little while. It wasn't real. Just wasn't real. And I'm at the point, we'll see what happens over the next 2 weeks, but I'm at the point where Joe Biden would have been a more formidable opponent against Donald Trump. That's where I'm at. All right. Watch and expect Democrats to do everything they can. All right. Don't DM each other all these things about ballots and this and that. Expect it. And just do, act accordingly. Expect it. Then people who are in power don't give up power easily. It's the nature. It's human nature. It really is. All right. But with that, I'm going to bounce. Nothing but love for all of you. I will see you tomorrow on Inside the Numbers at noon Eastern Standard Time. All right. Thanks, folks. All the links are in the description below. Don't forget to visit them. See you then.